IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are live here on a Wednesday. Is today Wednesday?
Yeah,
of course
it is
Wednesday.
Of course it
Notre
is.
Dame midweek rundown day. I'm sorry, man. These days are starting to
It's okay, man.
Really file together, man.
Hey, we get it, Ryan. You got a 1.5-year-old at home. You got a baby on the way. We're just glad that you're showing up. Yes. So, yeah, we're ready to rock and roll.
Thank God for the quick assistance of my phone that I click on the screen. It tells me what day and date it is. So we are here live on a Wednesday for Notre Dame midweek rundown, which if you haven't been watching this series we've been doing on Wednesday, basically this is like our this is basically a formatted. So we're going to take multiple topics that we kind of want to talk about from the week. Some important topics could be Notre Dame related, of course, could be college football related, and really spurn, I think, some great conversation. And today we're going to be talking about 3 really interesting segments. One will be on, of course, we'll talk about 2023 being a vital year. If you were on the podcast yesterday or you listened back later, there was a great question that came up about how much of a disappointment 9-4 season would be if Notre Dame
or would it be?
Yes.
Right?
How would it be if they were in 2023, if Notre Dame went 9-4 in back-to-back years? So we want to talk about just how vital of a year 2023 is. We're also going to talk a little recruiting in the middle section, talk some Bellwether recruits. Bellwether meaning, of course, players and recruits that show you that this staff, this roster, this program are really moving to the next level, whether they're beating some big time programs, they're winning some battles that maybe they typically would not have won in the past, and getting players to commit to this class that really could take this team to the next level. So we'll talk that. And then we're going to talk about transfers and specifically about some players that have chosen to transfer from Notre Dame this offseason, because there's another great conversation that happened in the Tuesday show about the fact that we now have had Logan Diggs transfer to LSU. You've had Tyler Buckner transfer to Alabama. You've had Lorenzo Styles transfer to Ohio State. And I wanted to beg the question of, should we be rooting for these players at their next stops and hope that they have great success? Or should we be hoping that they maybe do not have the greatest success? Or should you not care altogether? It's a great conversation that we're going to have. Before we get into it, of course, that like button, subscribe to the podcast, 5-star reviews, all that great stuff. Brian, I know the first conversation that we're going to have here, though, is one that is probably going to be a little lengthy because it has to be a little bit.
Sure.
Talking about 2023 in its entirety, how vital of a year it is, not only for this program, but for the perception of Marcus Freeman as a head coach. We know that he is a great recruiter. We know he's a great human being. We know that he's a really smart defensive coordinator and defensive mind, but we have to be true to ourselves and be truthful about the fact that we still needs to have proof of how good of a head coach he can be, some tangible proof on the table. So this is a big year for 2023, man. This is a vital second year for Marcus Freeman.
And notice we said 2023 year, not 2023 season, because it's a combination of the season and how you finish on the recruiting trail, because recruiting now ends basically for Notre Dame in 2023. I mean, in the end of the calendar year each year, because they're pretty much done by signing day in December. That's just kind of where Notre Dame is. Now they may get a kid or two, in February. We'll see. Hopefully they get a couple, because that means that they're in on some big time kids, because now it's really just like the big time kids that don't sign early for the most part. But your class is pretty much going to be decided as well. And really what it comes down to, Ryan, is here's why this year is important. And we'll talk about what degrees there are and what this team has to do. But here's what it comes down to. Right now, it's not that the shine isn't off the rose, so to speak, with Marcus Freeman.
Sure.
But we do now have a body of evidence of some good things and some not so good things we saw from him as a head coach in year one. And, those things kind of boil down to, obviously, you had the bad losses to Stanford. You had the bad loss to Marshall. You lost to Ohio State and USC, and some of those things are understandable. I mean, you went on the road and lost to a pair of top 10 teams. You were competitive in both games, especially the Ohio State game. You led for most of the game, really, until I think Ohio State scored with less than a minute left in the third quarter. But then you had some big wins as well. You won 6 of your last 7. You just absolutely destroy Clemson, give them like one of the worst beatdowns they've had in the regular season in a long time. You go into the postseason, you beat a South Carolina team that ended the season red hot with wins over Tennessee and Clemson, and you beat them without some of oh, they were missing their best players. Well, Notre Dame was too, right? So no Cam Hart, no Michael Mayer, no Isaiah Foskey. Don't at me with this whole they were missing good players thing, because they had as many top players back as Notre Dame did. And they went out and got the W. And so you saw a team that, to me, I thought showed a lot of poise last season when things went wrong. A team that had poor leadership early, that developed strong leadership later. I think that was something that impressed me. Every time things seemed to hit the fan, they were able to get these guys focused. You talk about Marshall, you start your season 2-0. It would have been very easy for that team to go completely into the tank. You're going on, you're facing a spunky Cal team early. You're able to get that W, kind of get yourself a little momentum, and then you go on the road the next week and smack a North Carolina team that spent most of the year ranked in the top 25.
Yeah.
And played for the ACC championship. Then you go out and you beat BYU in a game that wasn't really as close as the final score. Then you have that, oh man, the Stanford game. Oh, so brutal. And then what do? You rattle off 5 straight wins after that. And really, one of the most embarrassing losses that Notre Dame has had in a long time, that game was. When you talk about the fact that it had been over a calendar year since Stanford had beaten an FBS team. And how do they bounce back? They beat UNLV. And really, they struggled to put UNLV away late, Ryan, but they jumped all over UNLV in that game. I mean, they came out and it was 23-7 at the end of the first quarter. It was 30-7 at halftime.
Right.
They just didn't put them away in the second half, but they came out, especially defensively, came out ready to play in that game. And, and then they rally, but then it's just kind of like, okay, 9-4, still sort of an okay year, disappointing year. You were preseason top 5. They should have been ranked higher than they finished, meaning not that they were gypped out of a ranking, but more so they should have been better than what they ended up in the rankings. They should have. And so there were some lessons learned from Marcus Freeman, but you're at the point now where I don't think the shine is off the rose, but that's what makes 23 so important. Because if you don't sort of bounce back this year, then it is. And it's going to become so much harder for Notre Dame to recruit. Because I think that a lot of people complain about NIL and the transfer portal and all this kind of stuff. And I'm convinced, Ryan, that stuff has been helpful for Notre Dame, but it could be damaging if Notre Dame's not in the right place. And we haven't really seen anyone be able to negatively recruit against Marcus Freeman really effectively yet.
Right.
Because most kids and parents and high school coaches are like, look, it was year one. They understand the reasons why you weren't as good as you should have been last year.
Right.
And so you're still getting a little bit of a pass. Go 9-4 again, have a disappointing season again, go 9-3 with a couple bad losses, and all of a sudden it's like, great recruiter, excellent defensive coordinator, but he's not a great head coach. That's going to be the thing that people are going to say. Now, we could argue it's too early to make that determination, but that's what's going to be the pitch, and it's going to make recruiting a lot harder. And now I think the NIL stuff and those other things become a lot more damaging, because the whole I want to play for Marcus Freeman thing isn't as impactful, right? That's the concern. But then there's the flip side. If you have the success on the field this year, you look at this team and say, now how do you recruit against Marcus Freeman and the staff? That's going to be the question. True. That's really what's at stake for Notre Dame this season, Ryan.
I think so, because I think talking to recruits last year, especially in before the 2023, during the 2023 cycle, during the 2022 season, I think what you saw, Brian, for me is that there was a big leap of faith with some guys, right? They're like, Marcus is that dude, love him, great personality, great defensive minds, all that great stuff, right? Parents love him, relatable. He had everything working for him. But I think this offseason is much more now. There's a lot more 2024 recruits, I would even say, because I agree, the shine isn't off yet. But I do think that there's more of a targets on the back as far as hey, let's watch a little bit, right? I need to see a little bit out of this thing, right? So there's still going to be players that are very much attracted to Notre Dame just off of Marcus Freeman and the future and the mission and all the things that are involved there. But I do think that there are definitely going to be some recruits, and I think it's fair, right? Like if I'll use one as an example. If I was Elijah Rushing, for instance, right? I think I would be like, you know what? I need to see it a little bit first, like before I make that determination. There's still going to be some guys that are just going to be like, nope, I believe in it. I don't need to see anything. We're good. But I do think that after a 9-4 season, there is much more to a claim for some kids and some parents to be like, hey, let's make sure this is real first, right? There was a couple hiccups year one. Was it just a transitional period thing? Is there a lapse somewhere in the program, either from the top up, or was it just the transitional year? I do think that conversation has happened for some. And I think that it should have happened, honestly. If I was a parent and my son wanted to go to Notre Dame, removing my Notre Dame bias away for a second, I would say, we know that guy is a great charismatic person, but we need to see if he can develop you into a great football player. We don't know that 100% yet, right? So I think looking and just kind of taking a step back, I think that is a very much a conversation that had to be had this offseason. But to your point, Brian, 9-4 or worse in 2023, then it's like, man, I'm not sure if this is a thing right now. Like, I'm not sure if this mission is real because, to your point, and I agree with it, and I think a lot of people do agree with it in this community, especially, Notre Dame has enough talent to potentially make a playoff run this year. They do. And that's the perception, is that you just brought Sam Hartman in, and what was the excuse for years was that, hey, we're really talented, but we haven't figured out the quarterback position. Well, you just brought in a quarterback all of a sudden. So if Notre Dame is not successful from a win-loss perspective this year as much as they should be, I do think that you have to, again, not sound the alarm, but like you do need to take a step back and be like, man, I need to evaluate this a little bit. And that's not me evaluating for like, should Marcus Freeman have a job or not, but as a recruit, I need to evaluate this a little bit deeper, a little bit more. So I think 2023 is vital from the recruiting side of things, man. I think it matters so much to how impactful this staff can continue to be on the recruiting trail that we've seen a lot of glimpses of great things, obviously, in the first two cycles under Coach Freeman.
So there's a couple ways to look at this. Okay, what does success look like? What do we need to see? It's not just, have X record. There's a lot more to it than that. Obviously, on-field success is key number one, right? And you need to have on-field success. And that means a lot of different things. So step one, to me, on-field success, and this is the opportunity because it's not just looking at it from the negative point of view. I want to look at this from the positive point of view mostly. We've established what the negative is, but what happens if the positive is established this season? And here's what those things are going to look like. These are going to be the determining factors. Is your big game success or lack thereof? You've got 3 huge games on the schedule this year. And then I would argue you've got about 4 other really important sort of next level games that people they're not going to be the sexy, teams like releasing outlets. Hey, here's the top 10 non-conference games of the year. Like 2 or 3 Notre Dame games are on there like every year. Right. Somebody's going to have the Ohio State game. Somebody's going to have the Clemson game. So there's going to have the USC game. A lot of people have 2. Some may even put all 3 of them on there. They're going to be huge games, right? I mean, they're all top 15 teams, consensus top 15 teams. A lot of rankings have all 4 of them in the top 10, or at least the 3 teams that we're talking about ahead of Notre Dame. That's Ohio State, then USC, and then at Clemson.
Yep.
What's Notre Dame's record in those big games? 1-2 could have you still having a pretty successful, good season, took a step season. I would be a little disappointed in it, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
But perception-wise, as long as you win the rest of your games, there's still you went 8-4, you improved on it 2 games, you went 10-2, et cetera, and then it comes down to, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you better win your bowl game.
Right.
Whatever bowl game you're playing in, you better win your bowl game and finish 11-2. 11-2 would have went, because 10-2 gets Notre Dame into a pretty decent bowl game, right? I mean, it's going to be some SEC team or some Big 12 team, and you're going to have a chance to go get a sort of a statement bowl game win against an LSU, a Tennessee, something like that, right? Or maybe even a Georgia, Alabama, if one of those 2 teams doesn't make the playoff or is, the 3 seed or something along those lines. So you have an opportunity there to have that kind of win in the postseason. All of a sudden, you're 11-2, and 11-2 against this year's schedule, to me, is a lot more impressive than 11-2 from 2021 or 2019 when you literally played 3 ranked teams all year and went 1-2 in 2019. Or in 2021, you played 1 ranked team all year and they beat you. That was not an impressive 11-2 season. Then you look at like Kelly's 2017 season where they went 9-3, and you're actually like, that was a pretty freaking impressive 9-3 record. Now, the loss to Miami was a bad loss,
Sure.
But you beat a lot of good teams that year. I mean, to get to 9-3, you had to beat a lot of good teams. So give me that 9-3 over the 2021 11-1 because I have some big games to point to. Yeah. Now, this year, to me, you want to say, I want to err on the side of, okay, but now get me the 11-1 against a good schedule, right? That's the progress as a program. But you've got to have big game success. That means the 3 regular season games, and that means success in the postseason, whatever level of postseason success or post-game season game you're going to have. If it's a major bowl game, if it's a New Year's Six game, if it's a playoff game, you've got to go out and have success in those games because Notre Dame still has not won a New Year's Six game since what? 1994, I believe. Like that.
Yeah,
right? January 1st, 1994, when Notre Dame, I mean, think about it. The last time, think about this. The last time Notre Dame won a January 1st bowl game, a current commit in the 2024 class and a top target in the 2025 classes, dads were on that team. Think about that.
Yeah.
Bryant Young and Jim Flanagan.
Yeah.
And another 2024 or 2025 recruit and Jerome Bettis Jr.'s dad had already left Notre Dame the year before. That's how long it's been.
Yep.
And so, you look at it and it comes down to it to where that's a needle mover. That's something that has not been accomplished in a long time. Yes, 11-2 to me would probably be a little disappointing if you go 1-2, but you're making up for one of those losses with a big season-ending win over a big-name program, and that at least gets you moving forward. I may say, hey, look, that's not as good as this team could have been, but you took a step forward as a program. And now, all of a sudden, the mantra about Marcus Freeman changes from, well, he's a little bit of an unknown to, hey, this guy had some big flipping wins this year. You combine that with the win he would have had over Clemson last year, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, this guy's – they're not there yet, but they took a step. That to me is a key.
I think it's doing things that you haven't done in a long time, right? Like we always talk about the not winning a championship since 1988, but to your point, Brian, the not winning a major bowl since 1994, like that has a monkey on your back right now.
I mean, literally last year's Gator Bowl was the biggest one they've had since that year. I mean, as far as like style, terrible. Like top game. I mean, the next closest you could argue is the Camping World Bowl over LSU in 2017 is the next closest. But I would even, I don't even think that one's there, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
I think the Gator Bowl is the biggest bowl one they've had.
Yeah.
Which one's bigger?
Yeah. No, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, they had Oklahoma State almost, but that's another conversation for a different day, right? But I mean, to your point though, Coach Freeman, I think it doesn't have to be a year-to-year perspective, but in his tenure, he has to accomplish things that Notre Dame fans of this generation, of this era, my age bracket especially, have not witnessed before. Like that's the next step of things, right? You talk about the big bowl wins. You talk about the flip of the expectations from the recruiting side of things. And I know we'll get into the second section here about the Bellwether recruits, but that's another part of this conversation where you go and say, Marcus Freeman is changing a narrative. And I think that narrative has to change under him. And he has a chance to do that. That is what is on the table. I mean, because again, Brian, I know, some people will say this is bias or whatever, because we cover Notre Dame, blah, blah, blah. But from my perspective, I truly think Notre Dame can compete this year. I do. Sure. I do. I think that they are at least a New Year's Six bowl type of team. But I think that they can potentially make a playoff berth. Sure. I really do, man. I do. And with that in mind, when you have that expectation so high and you have as much talent as you have with Notre Dame, how does Marcus Freeman show that he is that guy to hit expectations or exceed them? Like that's the thing, is you can't underperform to what the expectations are. And I think that's what Coach Freeman has the opportunity to do. And I think he can do it. I really do. It's just about getting this team to buy in going into the 2023 season, because their talent is there, man. It just is.
And pushing the right buttons. And then that leads us down to the next part of what on-field success looks like, Ryan. If you go 1-2 against the top teams on your schedule, okay, that's disappointing. That's exactly what you did last year. You lost to Ohio State, you lost to USC, you beat Clemson. But why was last year viewed as not successful? It wasn't because they lost to Ohio State and USC. Most people understood that. It was, how the heck do you lose to Marshall and Stanford?
Right.
So I think the next step for Coach Freeman that he has to show this year as the head of the program is he's got to show that he can lead this team to be a more consistent football team, to where 1 week you're not blowing out Clemson, and then 2 weeks later or a week later, you're struggling and hoping that Navy doesn't get one more possession at the end of the game because you haven't stopped them in an hour, right? I mean, it's yes, you look great against BC 1 week and you blow out BC a week after they, beat NC State, who was ranked in the top 25, and you whoop Syracuse convincingly, and you whoop North Carolina convincingly, and you give BYU a pretty good thumping, and they made it close late, but it wasn't that close. But then you barely beat Cal. You lose to Stanford. You lose to Marshall, right? It's that consistency of, you saw a little bit more of it later in the year, but even within that winning 5 of 6 down the stretch, Ryan, even within that, you still had a level of inconsistency because the team that played BYU looked nothing like the team that played, and the team that beat Boston just obliterated Boston. Now, look, BC was not good.
Right.
But they did to BC what you're supposed to do to a team that's not good. And I'll say again, BC was coming off of a 2-game stretch where they barely lost to a good Duke team and then went on the road and beat a top 25 NC State team. And Notre Dame absolutely annihilated them. I mean, annihilated them. And BC
that game was never even competitive. That game was never even competitive.
Yeah. I mean, and you look at Florida. Everybody talks about good Florida State's going to be this year. Well, they beat BC by 30. Clemson, they beat them by 28. Sam Hartman's team beat them by 28. Wake Forest beat them by 28. A lot of their other games were more competitive. Notre Dame annihilated them. And like you said, it could have been a lot worse. If it wasn't for the snow and Notre Dame yanking their starters pretty early in that game, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, they called off the dogs in that one.
Big time. And should have, to be completely honest with you. You were playing a really wounded animal at that point in time. It's like, do you really want to embarrass them? And especially with the snow conditions, you don't want to risk injury. I thought they put them away pretty effectively. But then it's like sandwiched in between those is the Navy game, where you couldn't figure Navy's defense out for an entire half. And you couldn't stop Navy's triple option in the second half of that game. You had no answers for the different things that they were doing. It's just like, even within the good, you still found some stuff where like, boy, this team has to be more consistent. Yep. And that's going to be another key factor for me, Ryan, is can this team play with a greater level of consistency than what we saw last season? Because I have a lot of criticisms of Brian Kelly's utter inability to beat any team with a pulse, and his ranking against top 25 and top 10 and top 5 opponents speaks of that. He was not good against teams that were ranked, and he was really bad against teams that were in the top 15 or higher at the end of the season. But the one thing Brian Kelly did throughout his second life at Notre Dame, which is post 2016, is they always beat the teams they were supposed to beat.
No doubt.
And so that's why you were winning 10 games every year, because they always beat the teams. They had like 40-something straight wins over unranked teams, something absurd like that. That deserves credit, because we've seen teams get knocked out. Ohio State's playing for the national championship in 2018 if they don't just sleepwalk through a game in West Lafayette, Indiana in October of 2018. Right? Yeah. That's what kept them out of the play. 12-1. That's what kept them out of the playoff.
Was that the Rondell Moore game? Rondell was like insane that game.
Yeah,
right?
It went off. Yeah. And then they ran the ball in the fourth quarter and just put that game away. Yes, that's exactly the game it was.
Yeah.
And you say, boy, imagine that playoff that year with Dwayne Haskins, Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, and Tua Tagovailoa as the 4 quarterbacks of the 4 teams in the playoff that year.
Be decent.
Right? Or who would they have knocked out? Who would an undefeated Ohio State team have knocked out? Probably knock out Oklahoma. And so now Bama in round 1 has to go play Ohio State instead of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Or Notre Dame gets Alabama in round 1. And I would have liked to have seen that game. I thought Notre Dame matched up a lot better against Alabama that year than they did Clemson, in my opinion. And then it would have been Clemson and Ohio State in round 1. So, all those things happen, but it's just, can you show up and answer the bell week after week after week and beat the Marshalls and beats the Stanfords? That's something that Coach Freeman has to prove, because if he can do that, Ryan, if he can beat so we're talking obviously Navy, we're talking NC State, we're talking Tennessee State, we're talking Central Michigan, Duke, Louisville, Pitt, Wake Forest, and Stanford, right? That's the 9 non-quote-unquote big games that you're going to play. You got to win all those games. If you do that, Ryan, no matter what happens in those other big games, you've at least answered one question, and that is you've eliminated the whole, well, hey, you lost to Marshall and Stanford thing. Which right now is something. What is something every non-Notre Dame fan says whenever you're debating Notre Dame right now? Well, you guys lost to Marshall and
You
Stanford.
lost tomorrow. Oh man, I
There are
literally
Notre
saw it
Dame
on
fans
Twitter
that say that.
yesterday. Saw it
Yeah,
on Twitter
you lost to
yesterday.
okay, that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, but sure, whatevs. You can talk about that. But I mean, if we're having an honest conversation about something that Marcus Freeman needs to show as a head coach, that is a valid criticism to say. It's a stupid, petty response to like something that has nothing to do with what kind of team Notre Dame was last year.
Yeah.
But that's something that Coach Freeman has to show, and that's another step that's going to be very important for him to show this season because it shows the ability to really have control of your team from start to finish, and that's a very important piece to being a great head coach.
I think so. Yeah, I mean that's a big thing. I mean, Brian, I mean, I think the point that you made is that last year it was just so inconsistent from a week to week perspective. I mean, forget about the 1 and 2 against the pillar games that I always call it, right? Against the Ohio State, Clemson, USC. It was that you couldn't depend on this team. I mean, BYU was a game I remember. The North Carolina and BYU were games in that season where you were just kind of like, okay, I think Notre Dame is figuring it out a little bit, right? Like they're starting to turn a corner a little bit. They're starting to understand themselves. They're starting to mature. And then Stanford happens, right? And then that Stanford game happens. And you're just like, I don't get this team. Like, I don't understand this team. Like psychologically, I don't get it. And that's where I will chalk that one up to a first-year head coach figuring out his football team.
Sure.
I will give him that one. But year 2, that can't happen again, to your points. The progress from year 1 to year 2, you can't give him a pass this year to not beating the Stanford level teams, the Marshall level teams. That needs to be beneath you. And I understand, again, we talked about it, and someone even asked about it, Brian, as far as like the leadership in things that were happening at the beginning of the season and not buying in from some players. And there were things, and this is real, there were things that Marcus Freeman needed to figure out in year 1 and fix as far as the formation and understanding of what this program stands for and how they're going to buy in. There were some difficulties in that regard. Year 2, we have seen this offseason, some people removed, some people went pro. This is now Marcus Freeman's football team. This is his. This is his staff. This is his football team.
Big time.
He has to take that massive hold and be like, year 2 is the progress to show that everything I did last season was a learning experience, and I am learning, because that's ultimately what he's going to be judged upon, is what his improvements are as a head coach.
Just think about what this Notre Dame football team would be judged as right now if they simply beat Stanford. If everything else pans out the exact same way and all they did different was they beat Stanford. You're talking about a team that you would have said, hey, look, before losing to a really good USC team in a game where they were better, USC was better than Notre Dame that day. There's no debate about it. We have said before a couple things. Boy, if you just make that one stop, at one point, or if that first drive of this third quarter, I feel if Notre Dame goes down there and puts the ball in the end zone and scores there, I think they have a shot to win that game, because I don't think USC would have handled it well. We've seen that. But those things didn't happen. And the way the game played out, USC was the better team from start to finish, because when USC needed to make a play in a tough situation because Notre Dame was coming back, they made them. Every time Notre Dame needed to make a play on offense or make a stop, whether it's 4th down, whether it was 3rd and short, USC's defense made those plays. Notre Dame's offense didn't. Or USC's offense would make those plays in 3rd and short, 4th and short, whatever the case may be, and Notre Dame didn't. They were the better team. And so, but it was a Pac-12 title winner. USC was a really good football team last year. You had the Heisman Trophy winner. People would have said, hey, you know what? Dude, you went out there and went 9-3. You won 9 straight games after that loss to Marshall. You beat everybody you're supposed to. You smacked Clemson. You handled your business, went into a bowl game, won a game, and you're 10-3. I know it seems silly to say this, but a one-game difference where that one game puts you from a single-digit win to a double-digit win completely changes the perception of this football team coming into the season. I guarantee it would have, and rightfully so. You'd have been like, dude, you won 10 of your last 11 games. This is a hot football team. And the team that beat you during that stretch, they got to come to your place now this year. And you actually have a quarterback this year. But that Stanford game just still kind of lingers over your head of, well, we don't know if this team can answer the bell every week. Hey, this team could go out and beat Ohio State, USC, and Clemson and still go 10-2. If you don't improve that, right? I mean, am I saying anything wrong? I mean, you lost to Marshall and Stanford last year. We know you can play with Ohio State. You did it already in your first game as a coach. We know you can beat Clemson. You absolutely annihilated them last year, and we know that you can beat USC. They could win all those games and still not be a playoff team because they don't answer the bell every week, which is what we saw this year.
Right.
And that's what you have to avoid. You can't.
Yes.
You need to have some big game success, but just as important as establishing dominance in those games that you're supposed to be dominant. Because the last thing you want to do, especially with ACC opponents, Ryan, you've had a pretty good track record of blowing ACC teams out. You still have that going.
Yep.
And not blowing them out, but you win. I mean, when was the last time they
yeah.
lost an ACC regular season game? 2017, right, to Miami? I think that's the
so.
last time they've lost a regular season game to an ACC team. Now, Clemson beat them in the ACC title game and in the playoff in 2018. But in the regular season, Notre Dame's like creeping up on like 30 straight wins, if not over 30 straight wins over ACC opponents. They haven't lost a regular season game. They play minimum 4 every year. They haven't lost a regular season game to an ACC team since 2017, be the loss to Miami. Because they lost to Stanford at the end of that year, Pac-12. 18, they didn't lose any regular season games. And 19, they lost to SEC and Big Ten. In 20, they lost. They went undefeated in the regular season, correct? They went 10-0 in the regular season. Yep. And then in 2021, they only lost to Cincinnati. And then last year, they lost to a Big Ten team, a Pac-12 team. Was it Conference USA team? And two Pac-12 teams and a Conference USA team. So you can't lose that dominance, right? And you've got to still establish, hey, we still are the best ACC team. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? Because that's important come playoff time and major bowl game time as well. Is hey, we're still the dominant program in the ACC, and you have to be able to, especially because what's a big recruiting area for you? It's ACC country right now. You're doing great in ACC country. I mean, ACC country is a big part of Notre Dame's success right now in the 2024 class.
Yep.
You know, you've
Carolina,
got 3 kids from the Carolinas. You got a kid from Virginia now. You got a couple kids from Georgia. 3 kids from Georgia in your class. Like, you know, that's ACC country, and you're trying to close this class off with guys in ACC country. So that's a big part of the success there, Ryan, is being able to beat the teams you're supposed to beat, right? Yep. And that's step 2 for me. And it goes with step 3 for me, Ryan, which is this staff has to show that they can develop talent. Not that they haven't shown it, in that we've seen a lack of success. It's just when you haven't been somewhere long enough, you have no track record of doing it. So year 1, okay, they didn't. Now in year 2, they need to show that. And what is development, Ryan? It's taking the younger players with talent. There's a lot of ifs about this football team, right? The success you're going to show is, can you take those ifs and turn them into yes? No, that's the deal. And that's going to be so important. And that right there is the key to the first 2 things we talked about. We really could have talked about that first, but I wanted to talk about the game success first and then get into some of this other kind of stuff. And development, being able to develop your football team, the culture of your football team, which you talked about earlier, is vitally important. But you also have to be able to develop the players. And that's going to be, that right there, Ryan, is going to be what determines if this team can be as good as it should be this season. Is can Al Washington develop a talented but inexperienced and I would say inexperienced, unproven from a production point defensive line? Can Chris O'Leary develop the secondary? Can Chancey Stuckey develop a talented but unproven receiving core? Can Dylan McCullough, overcome the loss of Logan Diggs and get those talented other backs ready to go? Can Jared Parker develop the tight end room now that Michael Mayer's gone? And can Joe Rudolph coach the offensive line even in the same league as in universe as Harry Hiestand? The development that's going to come from that is going to determine if those first 2 things we talked about get answered positively. And if not, then this is going to be a disappointing season. If it does, it not only results in a positive results, Ryan, but it completely changes the one narrative, the one question mark about Marcus Freeman. And it's a question mark because he just hasn't been doing this long enough to prove that he can or cannot do it as a head coach.
Well, and I think that for me, I mean, you talk about this on the college level or the NFL level. When coaches come in you always need to give them a grace period to get their guys in the room, right? And that talks about the staff side of things, that talks about the player side of things. But we have now seen Marcus Freeman have a full year of recruiting. Obviously, he was a part of the recruiting process in the 2022 cycle, but he has his full year of 2023. He was also a part of, obviously, the process of bringing in some transfer portal kids this year. So the acquisition of talent, this is much more Marcus Freeman's team this year from a roster perspective than it was last season. You're talking about a lot of guys, most of the guys that were recruited by Coach Kelly in the previous staff. You now have a bigger influx of players that were recruited by Marcus Freeman on the staff, which says that there's an imprint there. Now, we've talked about this, and I think it's a perfect example in the 2024 class, Brian, of like, and actually 2023 as well with the defensive line, is that I believe that Notre Dame has been recruiting as if they believe that they will develop talent at a high level because they've been taking a lot of high upside players. You want to talk about Armel Mukam, Boubacar Traore, Brandon Vernon in 2023 class on the defensive line. You want to talk about some of the guys on defense that they've recruited in the 2024 cycle, guys that maybe aren't college ready from day one or year one, but year two, year three, if they're developed properly, they have a high upside to them. And I have to think that with that ideology on the recruiting side of things, that tells you that Coach Freeman and his staff are confident that they'll be able to get the most out of their players. But at the end of the day, have to show it, right? You have to, and we don't have any data points on that. I think that's the scariest thing is when you don't have data on something, right? It's a leap of faith. I can't tangibly say that that is going to happen. And that's an absolute, that he's going to get the most out of those players because you've never seen it before. And it's no shot against him. It's literally, if I started a new job for the first time, how do you know I can do the work until I do the work? You have no idea that I can do that work properly until I show that I'm capable of it and I'm show that I'm able to make things happen and to get stuff done. It's the same thing here. This is, the first year was a little bit of a data point. How can you recruit? What are the on-field look like? What do the day-to-day look like? What is the formation of everything? Year two now is a new step of more data that you're going to be able to gather to say, is this guy the guy? I think he can be. I do. I believe in Coach Freeman, but
you said the right word there, Ryan. What was the second word you said in that last sentence?
Belief?
Think.
Belief?
Oh, I think. Okay. I think he is that guy. I think it as well. But now it's, you got to show it, because the more he coaches without proving that, the easier it is to negatively recruit against Notre Dame. Because the best negative recruiting is negative recruiting that's true. And then at that point in time, it's not really negative recruiting. It's just speaking facts.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and you know, that's kind of where it comes down to is you have to be able to, the results have to do it. And we've talked about this. Why did Keon Keeley go to Alabama? Because Keon Keeley knows that if he goes to Alabama, he's going to get developed.
It's not a guess for him.
Not every kid is developed, but there's that just assumption that because why? It's the track record. And Marcus Freeman, to me, I think has shown he can develop as a defensive coordinator. But when you're the defensive coordinator and you have the success that you have, people can still say, well, Luke Fickell was the head coach, blah, 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 blah. Well, that can't be said now. It's Marcus Freeman's team. And to your point, this team is going to be so dependent on guys that never played for Brian Kelly or played very little for Brian Kelly's staff, that you can't say, well, hey, this is really about Brian Kelly's success or whatever the case may be. This is his, like you mentioned,
like
Ryan,
he's riding the coattails or something.
This team is going to be so much. There are going to be so few players on this team that were in Brian Kelly's system longer than they were in Marcus Freeman's. Very few. Yeah. Joe Alt is not that person. Blake Fisher, Sam Hartman, Audric Estime, your entire receiving core, like you're almost your entire offensive football team are guys that played one season or 0 seasons for a Brian Kelly coach football team. And so, but at the same time, you can't blame Brian Kelly either.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, you know, we inherited this, that, or the other thing. No, you've had 2 now seasons to recruit in the transfer portal. You went out and you had success in the transfer portal class. This is about you. And so that adds to it. But now all of a sudden, Ryan, you start to see that development come. Now that just, so the premise was kind of, you need to do this so teams can't negatively recruit against you. But the other side of that coin is, Ryan, that also means you now have things that you have more sort of tools in your tool shed, so to speak, when you on a recruiting trail.
Something in your
Hey,
holster. Yeah.
right now, yes. Right now, it's like, okay, well, this is what we want to do. This is what I'm going to do. And it's working to a degree on the recruiting trail.
Right.
But if it's like, hey, it's us or Ohio State, and what are the things that matter to you? Well, coach, I want to get a great education. Okay, that's a win for us. I want to play for a championship. Right now, that's check Ohio State.
Sure.
I want to, because Ohio State has won a championship in the playoff era. They've had 2 playoff games that were just they've won another playoff game. They won one in 2020. And they've had 2 other playoff games where it went down to the wire, and they had the chance to win the game at the end. They had a chance at the end of the Clemson game in 2019 to win, and Justin Fields threw an interception. They had a chance to win last year against Georgia, and they threw an interception. So Notre Dame has 2 playoff games where they were never competitive. Right. Really. I mean, you could argue for a quarter and a half they were competitive against Clemson, and I've argued that game was closer than the final score, but it was not a game where you thought, gee, Notre Dame could have won. It was more of a 17-13 game than it was a 30-13 game, 30-3 game. Excuse me, it was more of a 17-3 game than it was a 30-3 game. The defense played better than the 30 points and 500 yards they allowed. The offense was terrible the entire game. You weren't going to win that game because your offense couldn't compete. And your offense is, to me, why you gave up more points than you did. But you still weren't competitive. No matter how you slice it, you weren't competitive.
Sure.
And so, to me, Ohio State has ammunition to say, hey, look, you come here, you can play for championship. And they're being truthful. They literally just took the defending champs and team that eventually won it down to the wire, had a chance if they don't miss a field goal at the end and have a couple bad plays at the end, they win that game. And hey, I want to go to the NFL. And now, why am I using these 3 as examples? Because these are examples that Marcus Freeman said when he was hired, that these are the 3 things that it was on I think the Chris Zorich show. He's like, look, we need to be able to show kids that we're tremendous academically. We've got to show kids that they can compete for championships here, and we can develop them for the NFL. Right now, if you're going against Ohio State, you have 2 checks to Ohio State and 1 check for you. That's true against Clemson. That's true against Bama. That's true against Georgia. And they're always going to have the academic thing in their favor. But when you're talking about the best recruits, that's not enough. Right. Nor should it be. If I was advising, if my son was a 5-star quarterback with an opportunity to go play in the National Football League, and that was his dream, I'm going to make sure that wherever my son goes, if that coach, especially now in the transfer era, if that coach does not put a plan in place to make sure my son gets the best education he can at that school, he and I are going to have problems. But I do know that this guy is going to go out there, and if I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I was going to say something blasphemous.
I know what you're going to say.
Okay, I'll use Texas as an example, right? So if my kid was like, hey, I want to be a big-time quarterback, I say, look, let's go talk to Coach Sarkisian. Because I know my kid can get a good education at the University of Texas. Is it as good as Notre Dame's? No. But I have a much greater track record of success sending my kid there, knowing he's going to develop to be a big-time quarterback and a first-round draft pick, than I do at Notre Dame. That's just a fact, Ryan. It's just a fact. Mm-hmm. When that starts to change, Notre Dame becomes super dangerous on the recruiting trail. And that's the development piece. That's what we need to see. We need to see Jordan Patel and Riley Mills all of a sudden being talked about as, holy moly. Here's another one. If they can take Javonte Jean-Baptiste and turn him into a playmaker, it may not be fair because of how much talent Ohio State had, but that's going to be a great feather in your cap when you're recruiting against Ohio State for defensive linemen. Hey, that kid did this there. In 5 years, they couldn't get this kid here. In 1 year, Coach Washington turned him into this. And, well, those guys said, well, maybe they should have played him instead because look what he did, right? It may not be accurate, it may not be fair, but that's what teams are doing to Notre Dame right now.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a feather in your cap. And so those things all factor into it, Ryan, to where you now have some bullets in the magazine that you can utilize when it comes to recruiting against those top teams. Did you not see what we did to this kid? Right. Like we took Thomas Harper and turned him into such and such. You know, we took Benjamin Moore. Like Benjamin Morrison turned him into this when he wasn't even a top 300 recruit.
I was thinking about if let's say Joshua Burnham has a big season where you're just like, hey, Elijah Rushing, see what we just did with him. He was playing linebacker 2 years ago, and quarterback.
It could be Batelho, because you could say that you could say the same thing there, Ryan. Dude was a rover in 2021. He was a rover.
Sure.
And now he's now a 10+ sack guy. He's 6'2", 255. Elijah Rushing, what could we do with you at 6'6", 250? That's a great point, Ryan. Hey, we lost Isaiah Foskey, right? 14 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, number 40 overall draft pick. Jordan Patel steps in, and bam, he's right there. Riley Mills moves inside. Boom, look what he's doing. We developed Javonte Jean-Baptiste. He goes to Ohio State, comes here. He's an 8-9 sack guy. NFL's now calling. That's the development we need to see. That's the important piece. And here's the thing too, Ryan. That then leads to you winning. When those things are happening. Chancey Stuckey taking the potential at receiver and turning it into production where, in a perfect world, if I say, hey, what is the dream scenario for Notre Dame? The dream scenario is that in January, after the postseason, Deion Colzie or Jaden Thomas have a decision to make about their futures.
Sure.
And it's a decision of, do I stay or do I go pro? Right? That's the ideal situation you want to be in, right? It's where, Blake Fisher's got to say, I'm going to be a top 20 draft pick. Do I want to come back and maybe try to be a top 10 draft pick, or do I go now? Audric Estime has to make that decision. So those are where you want to be. You want to be in those situations, because that means you developed the talent and turned it into something. And that's what kind of gets you a little excited, Ryan. And that's what really helps you on a recruiting trail. But that also, more than anything, helps you go out and win football. It helps you be more consistent, because you're going to get the most out of your players on a consistent basis. And then it helps you go toe-to-toe with the best teams, because you can't just out-athlete us. Ohio State can't out-athlete Notre Dame. They can out-coach and outplay Notre Dame, and that's exactly what they did last year. But Notre Dame didn't lose to Ohio State because Ohio State had way better athletes. They had to grind that game out, and they did.
Yeah, they did.
And they did. And they out-coached Notre Dame. They made some decisions where Tariq Bracy goes down, Notre Dame makes a poor call. Ohio State does the smart thing and goes right at the guy that just came off the field. And next thing you know, boom, that's a huge play. Huge play. That's coaching. You out-coached them. Ohio State found some weaknesses in the Notre Dame defense in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame could never identify that in the Ohio State defense. They got out-coached. They didn't get out-athleted, in my opinion. Same thing against USC. They got outplayed at one position, in my opinion. That was quarterback. That was the biggest difference. The rest of it was coaching. And in my opinion, USC had a great game plan. USC said, we're not going to let your run game beat us. Yep. And Notre Dame played afraid of Caleb Williams. They coached afraid of Caleb Williams, and that allowed the run game to get going. With what we said all along was, to me, Ryan, was when you are in that game, make Caleb Williams beat you. Don't let the run game beat you.
Yeah, because that
was the mistake they made. Right. And that's what Utah did. Utah said, we're going to make Caleb, because we don't think your offensive line and your receivers are good enough to beat us for 40 minutes if it's just the Caleb Williams show. But if you're balanced, we're going to have a hard time beating you. 100%. And they were balanced against Notre Dame.
Quarterback's best friend is a run game, man.
That's
Quarterback's
right.
best friend is a run game. It really is. It makes things so much easier. Talk about the RPO game today. Talk about the play action game. Like, that stuff is just so advantageous for good quarterback play. Brian, I would also say, just from a fan perspective for a second, aren't we tired of just talking about the glimpses a guy shows, right? Oh, man, Jordan Botelho on those 3 snaps last year was so fantastic. Could you imagine if he puts it all together? Tobias Merriweather for his 1 catch of the season and 41-yard touchdown. Imagine that at a full volume.
Sure.
This player, wow, man, you saw it for that 1 game, but it doesn't tangibly turn into a season. I'm tired of that, man. And that's development. And that is development sometimes from the player's perspective, but more than anything, it's from the people that are developing them on a day in and day out basis. Strength and conditioning, coaching. That has to be a more consistent thing. I mean, I'm so tired of just remembering the brief glimpses of Kevin Stefferson, catching a couple big plays and this player and that player. It's just tangibly, you need to start developing at a higher level. I agree with you 100%, because as a Notre Dame fan, That's why I get so frustrated when the narrative gets pushed out there of there's no talent on Notre Dame's roster. They lack talent. I'm just like, that's not true. Some of it's not refined. Some of it isn't developed enough, but there's talent on Notre Dame's roster. There is.
Right.
And they need to show it on a more consistent basis, to your point. They need to.
Here's the final piece to this, Ryan, that's going to be key for Coach Freeman this year. That comes to what kind of coach are you really? Unless they win a national championship, there's room for improvement, right? So whether they go 9-4 and are disappointing, and that's when changes are easy to make, or let's say they go 11-2, are you a coach that's able to look in the mirror and say, we did pretty good this year, we got to get better. We didn't recruit well enough at this position. We didn't develop well enough at this position. And I got to make some tough decisions after this 11-2 season. That's something that Nick Saban and Urban Meyer were masterful at. They would look at 11-2 and say it was good, but it wasn't good enough. And here's the areas where we got to get better. Some of it's things that you can control. I didn't do enough to make sure that we were good enough here in our preparation. That's on me. It's going to get fixed. At the end of the day, you also have to be willing to say, hey, coach, so-and-so, I appreciate what you've done, but it's just not good enough. And we got to get better here. And you got to make a change. Because short of a national championship, there's got to be room for him. Now, could the exception be you go 13-0 and you play somebody really good in the title game and it's a back and forth game and it's a great game and they're just better than you that day? Some 2019 LSU type team emerges this year and you play them down to the wire and you're like, bro, nobody was beating that team. But you know what? We gave them a game.
Right. Like historically, there's very few teams that beat that team. Like
right. Yeah. Like that's a different story, right? So there's always exceptions, but I don't see that team emerging this season.
It's an outlier situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the final thing too, is can he make the tough decisions? You know, because that's the one concern I have. He's hired a lot of guys he knows and he trusts. And I hope it works out. But here's the deal. It can be a lot harder to remove those guys if they're not getting the job done, because I know him, I know his wife, I was there for the birth of his child. You know what I mean? Like those can be really hard decisions to make unless you have no soul, right? For Urban Meyer, they didn't seem very hard for him to make because I think he's just a completely immoral person who has no like moral conscience whatsoever, right?
Yes.
I don't think those decisions are super easy for Nick Saban, but I think that he makes them because they need to be done because that's his job. Dabo Swinney has a really tough time with that sometimes. And I think that's something that's maybe held his program back the last couple of years.
Seems like he's learning from that, though. Seems like he's learning a little bit.
Right. And the Brandon Streeter example is a perfect example.
Yeah.
But you could also argue, but it was so bad on offense that he had no choice.
Sure.
Right. And so, loyalty is a good thing, but sometimes it can also, you've got to find that balance between who am I most loyal to, this assistant coach or the players, my team, myself, my family, right? And that's the tough decision. And will he be able to identify those needs and be able to make those changes if this team doesn't live up to its expectations? That's the question that and it's not just about, the team could be really good on the field and you say, hey man, boy, these guys did a great job coaching. I'll use Chris O'Leary as an example because, Ryan, you and I think he's an excellent football coach.
Yeah.
But what if he does a really good job coaching safety this year, but the safety class stinks? Yeah. You got to be willing to say, hey, look, Chris, we got to do something about this. What is it that you're going to do? Is it, okay, we're going to shift our focus, we're going to do this, or do we got to make a move? Because making a change, Ryan, isn't always about firing a coach and bringing in someone new. Sometimes it's about, we're going to have you do this. We're going to make sure that we do this. Changes aren't always firing people.
Get you an extra analyst or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways that you can make a change.
Yep.
That's like sometimes firing someone it's the lazy thing to do. You fired this guy, but the reality is he wasn't really the problem. It was the way that you were doing this, or this.
It was the supports around him.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so you found your scapegoat, but you didn't actually address the problem. And it's just going to keep happening. That's not what I'm referring to. Sometimes, however, that is what it means. Making a change does mean I got to bring in somebody different here. but it's not always what it means. It means, hey, whatever we're doing right now in the recruiting trail with you ain't working, and we need to figure it out. Right? We need to sit down and figure it out. We're going to go over your logs. You're going to tell us kind of how you approach things. I may have Chad and me in the room a couple times when you're talking to a kid. We'll figure it out, but we got to fix something. We got to fix something with this. Maybe it means Mickens is more involved in safety recruiting now or something. I mean, that's what changes mean. It's not always fire dude, but it does mean you can't just do what you did. It could mean we need to hire 2 additional analysts this year to take some of the evaluation burden off of O'Leary, or some of the prep work for this, so he can now spend more time on recruiting. Or sometimes analysts and those guys can do recruiting, and there's levels of recruiting that they can do.
Right.
So those are all things that you look at. But can he identify the problems that keep you from being a championship team? And does he have the ability to make the tough decisions to fix them? That's the question.
That's the hardest part, honestly, for a lot of people, to your point, like, isn't it? I mean, it's because it's hard, I think, for people at times to be able to take a step back and truly evaluate when you're so close to the product. Like, some people have just convinced themselves that structurally every day we're doing the right stuff and we just need to keep working at it. And we need to keep plugging away and put our heads down. And sometimes people are so close that they can't remove themselves from the situation and be like, you know what? We could do that better. That could be better. We could do this differently. So I think that's the hardest thing for some people. I really do. And to your point, Brian, like, you're in a situation where Marcus Freeman has complete ownership over this team at this point. You have the coaching staff that you want, right? You have the players that you want. You have the role that you want. You have all that stuff. But you also must need to be understanding that you are still only a second-year head coach, and you need that developmental understanding of, like, hey, man, I'm not the best version of myself every day. Because, I mean, what do I say all the time, right? The minute you stop growing is the minute to find something else to do, right? You have to be constantly evolving and growing on a year-to-year basis. And I think that self-advocacy, that self-evaluation, that stuff is so important. But unfortunately, for some people, it's really hard to remove yourself from a situation at times. It's not an easy thing, but I think it needs to be when you're head coach and the guy that is a CEO, the leader of a program, the guy that makes the final call. That stuff is very important.
So that's kind of where we look at, Ryan. And then the final piece is this: you've got to close on the recruiting trail. And that's going to kind of transition to the next topic when we get to the next topic. But before we get to that, hit that like button, folks. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review. And guys and gals, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I promise you won't regret it. We got a lot of cool stuff we're already doing, more cool stuff that we're going to be doing. Got some all-22 film out. I'm going to start breaking down some O-line stuff. I'm going to put some O-line film breakdowns on there, some defensive film breakdowns on there this summer. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff on there. So definitely make sure that you are signed up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Ryan, let's talk about some Bellwether recruits, man.
Let's do it.
So why don't you
kind of lead us? I thought you were going. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So as we talked about in the original intro, the second segment of this podcast, talking Bellwether recruits, and basically what this section is for is really focusing on the 2024 class and deciphering of the remaining targets on the board for Notre Dame. Who are the guys that we would classify as a Bellwether recruit? What we mean by that is a guy that would be monumental to taking this to the next level. So you could think of a guy that maybe Notre Dame is in a big battle of some SEC foes, maybe comes from a territory that is not historically pro Notre Dame, right. A big victory that can really propel you to the next level.
And that not only that the recruit propels you, but what it signifies about this staff. And I use the term Bellwether because, as I've said this before, I used to love following politics, and I used to love election politics, right? I mean, there'd be like those counties, like this county has voted for the winner of the presidency since like 1824 or something crazy like that, right? Like, okay, wow, that's really interesting. Or up until 2020, the state of Ohio had determined, wherever the state of Ohio went, so went the country. right? And for however, I mean, so like think, well, Ohio's a pretty red state. No, Ohio voted for Obama. Ohio voted for Clinton. I mean, so it's been sort of one of those bellwether states. And so you look at it, and that's where this kind of comes from is what are the recruits in this class that show this staff is big time? They can close, they can go toe to toe. And if the first stuff that we talk about comes true and they can coach and they can develop and all that, this team becomes a juggernaut on the trail because they've got the right coaches in place.
Sure.
So who are those guys in this class? And then also there's a little bit of this to say that there's not enough of these guys at a certain position, which we'll get into. But I want to start off on offense, Ryan.
Yep.
When you look at the offensive side of the ball, there's really one player for sure for me that signifies, okay, they're going to be okay here. And that's Gearby Lambert on the offensive line. When I look at this offensive recruiting, I'm going to be honest. It's way too early to be making major prognostications of Coach Rudolph as a recruiter. Way too early. And
Yes.
This class as a whole won't show that because we've said for months, this is not a great offensive line class.
Yep.
So as a whole, if it's not like wow, you got all these elite players, I don't expect it to be like the 2014 O-line class with Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars and Sam Mustipher and Jimmy Byrne, who I like. They beat Ohio State for Jimmy Byrne. He's a 4-star recruit. He didn't pan out, but as a recruit, that's your number 4. It's a great O-line class, the 2013 O-line class. I don't know if it's possible to have that kind of class because you would literally have to get like 4 of the 5 best offensive linemen in the country because it's not a great year. Yeah. However, there are some evaluation question marks that I have. And then the bigger question is, can he close on the guys that you do want? Yes. Right now, Styles Prescott, Grant Bricks, and Gearby Lambert are sort of the 3 on the board. They need at least one of them. If one of them is not Gearby Lambert, then you need 2 of them. At the end of the day, Gearby Lambert, to me, Ryan, with all the things that go into who he is, where he's from, and all those factors and how important he is, no coach is defined and his career is defined by his first class.
Right.
And so it'd be unfair. So get rid of Rudolph. That's nonsense. That's childish and petty. We're not going to go there. However, you do start having major question marks if a guy doesn't have success that first year. Gearby Lambert is the guy that either says, okay, he's good. We're fine. We're good there. Or missing him means, okay, this is a big problem because you got handed this big time top 50 caliber player with huge upside on a silver platter, Ryan. Private school kid from Massachusetts. Notre Dame was his leader. And then you couldn't close
was in the
deal.
2023 class. Like there's just a lot.
You couldn't close the deal. That's number one when we talk about the offensive side of the ball.
Well, I mean, I honestly, if we're talking about can't miss prospects in this class for 2020 for the 2024 recruiting class, Brian, like Gearby would be, I think, very similar to what Justin Scott is on the defensive side of the ball. And I know we'll talk about Justin Scott, obviously, in this podcast moving forward here. But Gearby is a guy that Notre Dame needs, and needs for a lot of the reasons that you already talked about. It's not a great offensive line year. So when it's not a great offensive line year, you need to make sure that you get the guy that you have identified as potentially the best in the country. That's your guy. And it has been your guy. It has been Notre Dame's guy since Coach Heastan was still the coach, and it continues to be the guy since Coach Rudolph took over. That has been one consistent, right? Like Coach Heastan really liked Caleb Brewer, for instance, right? Coach Rudolph didn't like him as much.
Sure.
And so that changed. But one consistent that has been on this board is that Gearby Lambert has always been a premier player for Notre Dame. It's a guy that they need. This is a can't miss for that reason, for some of the reasons you stated, from the school that he comes from in Massachusetts, from the fact that he is a teammate of Boubacar Traore that you just got in the 2023 class. And also, he is the most clear left tackle on the board for Notre Dame, Brian. And let's call it what it is. If Joe Alt has another tremendous year, he's probably going to the NFL most likely. That's the fact.
I hope he does. I hope he does
too.
Because that means he either got hurt or had a bad year, and I don't want either of those things to be true.
And right now, there is a major question mark of who is that next left tackle. You could make a case for some guys. Blake Fisher if he comes back. Emil Wagner if he continues to add good weight. Charles Jagasaw if he develops. Like there's some options. but there aren't clear options right now. There's guys that you still have to project. And when you're projecting guys to that degree, what's the best way to make sure it happens? To get as many good options as possible, because eventually one will most likely pan out. That's the situation you're in. I like Styles Prescott as a player. I think he's talented. I just included him in a potential risers in the 2024 class of targets that are on the board. Because the fact that he's considered an almost consensus 3-star outside of one platform is ridiculous. It is. He should be higher than a 3-star. There's no doubt. But Gerby Lambert is a much more sure thing at left tackle, in my opinion, than what Styles Prescott is. I really like Grant Brix, but Grant Brix is a right tackle or a guard. That's what he is.
Well,
to me.
I know you keep saying that, and I understand why you're saying that. My point would be, I don't think that we know if he can be a left tackle. I personally don't think it's correct to say he's not a left tackle because of the way he's used. The point though where I would agree with you, Ryan, is you can't take the risk that you think he can be a left tackle because the manner in which he's used makes it harder to evaluate that.
Sure.
That's what I would say. I could agree with you there.
Clearer answers, I think, is what I'm trying to find. And I think Gerby Lambert is the clearest answer of being one of the potential options at left tackle for Notre Dame down the roads.
Right.
And if you miss out on that kid, if we're talking about expanding the board even at some point, do you want to expand the board that much in a year where you have already dubbed is not the greatest offensive line? I was completely fine with Coach Easton leaving a smaller board this year, Brian, because I'm like, it's not a great year. Like, I get why it's such a small board. I get it. And even when Coach Rudolph came on, the board hasn't expanded much. It hasn't. And I think that's an indication of like, it's not a great board this year.
Nor should it expand. It's land the guys that are on the board. Like, listen, if you're going to give me a 4-man offensive line class and it's Gerby Lambert and one of Grant Brix or Styles Prescott, I'm thrilled. You put them with Peter Jones, and now all of a sudden Anthony Knapp's your 4th best offensive lineman in my view, and I can live with that. I can absolutely live with that. But and I like Styles Prescott. I'll just leave it at that. I like Styles Prescott. He's a nice player. But if your 3-man offensive line class is him, Anthony Knapp, and Peter Jones, I don't love that. Now, again, I'll say I understand it. It's not a great O-line year, and one bad miss can completely change the face of things. Sure. I understand all that, but you can't miss that guy. That's the whole point. He's at a private school in Massachusetts. You were his leader early. It's close the deal. You've got to get him. And so to me, a lot of my current concerns about Coach Rudolph go away, or at least are alleviated for the time being if he lands Gerby Lambert. It will be. And if he can land Gerby Lambert and one other of those two guys, then I'm fine with that.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good offensive line class to get to. If you get Gerby Lambert and one of Grant Brix or Styles Prescott, along with Peter Jones and Anthony Knapp, I look at that class and I'm like, it's a good class. I'd be very happy with that situation. I agree with you.
Yeah. There's another one on offense, Ryan, and to me, it's a second running back of high quality is a bit of a bellwether. And to me, the reason I say that is because there's really 2 guys on the board that fit into this mold for me. Anthony Carey from Florida and Kedron Young from Texas. Now, for me, Kedron Young is the number 1 back on my board. I think he's a top 100 football player. I love that kid's film. But it's not just but I also think Anthony Carey is a heck of a football player. So it's one of those, I'm not going to say, hey, if you don't get Kedron Young, you failed because you got Anthony Carey. That's silly. That's just not how recruiting works, in my opinion. You have 2 really good backs on the board. Whatever I think of where they rank, they're both really good football players. You need to get one, in my opinion. It does twofold. Number 1 is it gives you a big time back. I think it does 3 things really. Number 1, it gives you a very talented back, lead back type player. Number 2, it makes the addition of Aeneas Williams even better.
Sure. Because
now you can even more so use Aeneas in the role that I think he best fits, which is sort of a complementary back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then number 3, in order to get one of those 2 players, you got to go into a big time state, one of the 2 best states in the country producing talent. You've got to beat some in-state schools for Kedron Young. You've got to beat some SEC schools for Anthony Carey. So to me, that's another bellwether. Can you go into a big-time state, convince a running back to be the second back in the class, and can you land an impact talent? Now, Coach McCullough did that last year in Jeremiah Love, and he gets
Sure
credit.
did.
However, here's the
Yeah.
difference. They did get on Jeremiah Love a little bit earlier than most people, and he wasn't a big-time back when you got on him. But even more so, it's about stacking. Because as good of a coach as we think Dylan McCullough is, he's never been in a place like Notre Dame where you could really expect him to get Keidron Youngs and Jeremiah Loves and Anthony Carries every year. It was an unrealistic expectation. So that is one question that I still have for him is, can he go out and do it year after year after year?
Yep.
Dude, phenomenal job in year one. Great job. Great job. And getting Jabron Payne on board when you were hired initially has turned out to be a pretty savvy move as well.
It does
So far, Coach McCullough has done a very good job. I like Aeneas Williams. But because now running back is a need, I need to know that you can shift gears and go get a big-time back, not just another guy. Right. And that to me is why Keidron Young is a bellwether for me. And I think you could throw Anthony Carey into that conversation as well. One of those two guys.
I think it's very important to get a second back in this class, Brian. I mean, one is, yes, both players are very talented. They both come from very important areas of the country from a developmental perspective of finding great football players. And you need running back depth at this point with Logan Diggs no longer being a part of the program and the potential of Aldrick Estime going pro after the season, now being draft eligible. You need to start planning for the future a little bit here. And let's call it what it is, right? Of the guys that would return for sure in 2024 that we know of, there are a couple injury concerns that you can't just kind of overlook, right? Jadarian Price is still coming back from a Achilles injury. Jabron Payne has had major injuries in the past. There is still that question of what the durability is going to be and some of the depth of the roster right now for Notre Dame on top of just filling numbers. So I agree with you. And I think that especially everyone loves recruiting rankings and offer lists, right, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
You want to look at an offer list? Go look at Anthony Carey's offer list, folks.
Sure.
Just go look at it. It's like 50 offers or something like that, man.
Yeah.
That is one of the craziest offer lists I've ever seen. And Keidron Young is one of the biggest risers in the recruiting side of things. He's now considered a 4-star by, I think, every single platform. Because you remember when he was originally offered by Notre Dame, he was like a 3-star, but I think like 3 of the 4 major platforms. He's now a consensus 4-star. And you got a lot of dudes coming after him now. I mean, there was a point where it was like Texas Tech was a big school, Baylor was a big school. Now you got like legitimate contenders for a guy like Keidron Young. So yes, you're going into premier territory. You're fighting for 2 talented backs, and you're fighting some of the elite in the country. I mean, literally, guys, like go look up Anthony Carey's offer list. He's got every SEC school accounted for, every school on the East Coast accounted for. Everyone's looking for that kid. Everyone's going after that kid. And so getting a player of that caliber or a Keidron Young, I think would be monumental for the Notre Dame class, because you have to fight against some of the premier programs of college football in a state that's Texas has been good to you the last 2 years, but you still are trying to make your full imprint in Texas because it wasn't a great state for you the previous 5 before 2023. Florida is a state that you have had trouble getting into over the last few years. Florida has not been great for Notre Dame. Getting into both those territories and continuing any type of momentum you can gain is big time, on top of getting 2 talented football players.
Mm-hmm. Let's move over to the defensive side, Ryan. This one's a little bit easier. As a matter of fact, you could say we needed to add some guys. But the number one bellwether on defense, regardless of position, is Justin Scott. And there's so many layers to this. But the one that I want to focus on here is beyond the need, beyond all those things. If you can't beat the best schools in the country who are coming after Justin, for a kid in your backyard at a Catholic school, then I have to say either A, Notre Dame just can't recruit elite players, which I refuse to accept, or B, you don't have the right people doing these recruitments and your strategy needs a major check. Because like there's things you can say, like even forget just the Al Washington aspect of it. And obviously if they don't get Justin Scott, it would be a big black eye for Al Washington. And if they get Justin Scott, it's okay, let's leave the dude alone now a little bit, right? I mean, that's really what's at stake for Justin Scott. It's Because if you get Justin Scott to go with Owen Wafel and Cole Mullins and Bryce Young and Logan Thomas, for example, bro, I got nothing for you, man. Great job.
Yeah.
I mean, great
Agreed.
job.
Agreed.
And the difference is with this class, you can't really look at it like last year's class where you say, well, yeah, I know they got so-and-so, but Chad Bowden's the primary recruiter for Boubacar Traore and Armel Mukam. Mike Elson recruited Brendan Vernon. So who did he get? Devin Houston, who Notre Dame led for the day you were hired.
Right.
You could spin that, and I don't even call it spin. That was just the facts. If you get the 5 they're getting now, of course other coaches helped. Of course Chad Bowden was involved and Mark Street was involved. That's how recruiting should be. But you cannot deny that Al Washington will have played a pivotal role in all 5 of those recruitments. You can't deny it. And so you got to step back and say, dude, I was hard on you. I had a reason to be hard on you. You stepped up to the plate and got it done. Well done.
Right.
Well done, good and faithful servant. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of it. And so, but if you lose them, dude, it's a bad one because you've got a 5-star recruit in your backyard. There's nothing about him that screams that any other school should get him. But again, it's not just an Al Washington thing either, Ryan. Since the latest open period started after spring ball, they've been on the road for 3 weeks. There has been several kids they've gone out and seen twice. They've only seen Justin Scott once. Now, Gino Gadouli's doing some Chicago recruiting today. Maybe he swings by the high school. But there are more things involved here than just that to me. Yeah. And so I just feel like now some people say, well, you need to get out and see him every week. That's not practical, especially since the head coach can't be out on the road right now.
Right.
It's just not practical. But yeah, I'm sorry. Every other week at least you should be out in Chicago seeing him and Talon Taylor and Nate Marshall and those top guys. 100%. 100%. 100%. And they went from making Chicago a priority to where now it's like on this most recent open on the road period, it's like, I'm not seeing it as much anymore. So that's why I was happy to see that Gino Gadouli was in Chicago today, but I'm very curious to see who exactly is he going to see. Is he just going to go see Cam and Talon Taylor, or is he also going to go to see the defensive guys? That's a question mark that I have.
And you know what, too, Brian? I think it's worth noting that the 2025 class, and you just hit on a couple of those guys, right? Talon Taylor, Christopher Burgess, Nate Marshall, Gabe Kaminsky, Dom Hulak, like all those guys in that area. How much of a black eye is it if they're like, wait, Notre Dame didn't get Justin Scott? They all know who Justin is. They all know it. They literally, they're neighbors. Like it's just they're right there.
Right.
If I'm Nate Marshall and I'm like, oh, Notre Dame, cool. I'm a Chicago guy. Awesome. But then I look and I say, wait, how come Justin Scott isn't going there? He's a Chicago kid too. He's going. Why isn't he going there? You need to also start gaining more momentum in Chicago, rearing up for 2025, man, because there's some dudes right in your backyard. And if you can't convince the biggest dude in your backyard in 2024 to come, if I'm one of those 2025 kids, I'm like, why isn't he going there? That's weird. Like, what? Why? You know, so I really think that not only is that a black eye of just everything you said, the pertinence to Notre Dame, the location in Notre Dame, the importance of that position in Notre Dame, it's also a black eye of like, recruiting in Chicago and making sure that you always have your imprint when you want to go into Chicago and get a kid.
Right.
Really
you can't miss in Chicago for kids you want. You just can't.
Ever.
You just can't.
You can't.
And especially this premium position. So he's a bellwether recruit. Now you win this battle. It's certainly a bellwether. It's a statement win. And we could and we will sort of nitpick the process of you should have had him in the class sooner. I get all that, and that'll be fair things. But at the end of the day, what really matters is just get him in the class.
Yes.
And I said this before. I was having this conversation with Sean yesterday. And I said, look, I just have a hard time being thrilled about a situation where a kid in the last calendar year will have been on Notre Dame's campus once by the time we get to the season. Like that's not, I mean, yes, I do think he likes Notre Dame a lot. But at the end of the day, Logan Thomas will have been on campus 3 times in a stretch of about 2.5 months, and Justin Scott will be here once.
Yeah,
and has twice now canceled visits. Canceled the junior day, canceled coming for the blue gold game. You know, you got more canceled visits than appearances. That's a problem, and we have to be able to
away.
Right.
Yep.
And I understand he's working into it, but he made time to go to Miami, and he's making time. He's going to take, I believe he's going to take an official to Miami as well. He's definitely taking a second trip to Ohio State. That means he's been to Ohio State twice. He'll take a second trip to Michigan. It means he's been to Michigan multiple times. He's going to take an official to Georgia. It means he's been to Georgia multiple times. So he's able to take multiple trips to Ohio State, Georgia, places like that, but you can't make a second trip to the school that's literally the closest to you of any school that you're looking at right now. That's problematic. And so, again, my sources feel Notre Dame still leads. All my sources do.
Right.
But I also have to look at this practically and say, what actions make you think that? I know there's a lot of words that say that, but we've been here before.
Yeah.
What are the actions? And so if he doesn't get on campus in May or June, even if it's just for a middle of the week visit, I'm going to get a little nervous.
Yeah.
I am. So, but you've got to win it at the end of the day. You've got to win this battle. There's another one, Ryan, that to me is very important in this conversation. And we're going to go to the second level, and that's Kingston Viliama Asa. That is the next one that to me is a bellwether recruit, because it says two things. Number one, we can recruit in the big schools in the out west in California. We can go into the Catholic schools and have some success. We're not going to load up like USC does, but we can win some of these battles, number one.
Sure. Yep.
It also means that we can go toe-to-toe with Ohio State and USC for a high school kid that they both want, that they both have long relationships with, and win that. And we can stack big-time linebacker classes on top of each other. Kingston Viliama Asa is the key. As much as I love Chris Cole's upside, Kingston is the key that, number one, solidifies this linebacker class, but even more than just that, it is the one that tells me that this staff can recruit big-time linebackers that not just have big-time, like Josh Burnham was a big-time linebacker, but he wasn't a big-time recruit. Right. Nolan Ziegler had a ton of talent, gave him a very high upside grade. He wasn't a big-time recruit. The only Drake Bowen in your backyard, Jaden Alsbury, that was a big win. Kingston is that type of needs to be that type of win as well. You need to be able to do that. Jalen Sneed was a big win, but one of your best friends is his high school football coach. You had that advantage. If BJ Payne is not Jalen Sneed's head coach in high school, do they get Jalen Sneed? That's a fair question we have to be willing to ask ourselves. If they get Kingston, then I don't care about that anymore.
Right.
Because they showed me they can get those guys. Maybe in Jalen's particular case, they may not have got him, but they would have got somebody else who's a dude. And that's why this one is a bellwether to me. It's not just an impact player, but what it signifies. Hey, we can go toe-to-toe with Ohio State and beat them for big-time players they want. We can go toe-to-toe with USC for in-state kids that they want and beat them.
Yep.
That's what a Notre Dame team that's recruiting at an elite level can do. And that's what they need to get done.
I think just like in a vacuum for a second, if we talk about Kingston, it's such an easy need for Notre Dame. One, because you need more true mics on the Notre Dame roster. You also talking about St. John Bosco, and just forget about, Catholic school in out in California. It's also the defending national champion on the high school level. Like, that is a fantastic program. And you would also be winning a player who fits you from just a personal perspective, from a player perspective, but also teams have been on this kid since he was a freshman in high school. Like, everybody knows who Kingston Viliama Asa is, and they have known for years and years and years. Like, they've known this kid. You're beating a lot of programs for this player. And to your point, Brian, a final three of Notre Dame, USC, and Ohio State. I want to hyper focus on Ohio State there for a second, because Ohio State in 2024 so far has beaten you for two linebackers that you wanted. They've beaten you twice. Everyone talks about Peyton Pierce, but they also beat you for Garrett Stover, who I know was an in-state kid, but that was a Notre Dame, Ohio State battle.
Garrett Stover was a guy that Notre Dame got in on really early, and he liked Notre Dame a lot, and they still couldn't get it done. But you're willing to give him a pass for Garrett Stover because he's an in-state
big Walnut,
kid,
Ohio guy.
Right,
yeah.
And his cousin starts at tight end for you. I get that one. I was really upset when he picked Ohio State. I would say upset, bummed.
Yeah.
Because I love the kid.
Yeah.
Great player. If he's the rover in his class, this is no disrespect to Teddy Rizak. I like Teddy Rizak. You know that. But Garrett Stover was my number one rover and still is. That one stung a little, right?
Yeah, he's good, man.
Peyton Pierce, whatever. But they still beat him, right?
Yes.
That was a guy that Notre Dame wanted. The only asterisk for that to me is I don't know that the coaches that were still here after James Laurinaitis left liked Peyton Pierce as much as James Laurinaitis did. That's my only caveat to that one. But you still lost him. Yeah. If you go 0 for 3 at linebacker, that's a tough one, because you you can make a case for the first two. One's understanding, two is like, is it really a loss? Because I don't know that the current staff really wanted him, to
Right.
be completely honest with you. James Laurinaitis wanted him. He was a pound on the table guy. I want this guy, and they were going to take him. Once he left, I mean, Ryan, you know this. Al Golden wasn't beating down that guy's door, but you know who else wasn't beating down Peyton Pierce's door? Marcus Freeman or Chad Bowden.
True. Yeah.
So it's like, I can live with those two. This is the one that you look at and say, no. Because, well, Ohio State's had a longer relationship. Have they? Really? Because who was the guy that was recruiting him at the beginning of the relationship with Ohio State?
Al Washington.
Al Washington.
Yeah. Yep.
So the coach who's been on him the long, now you could say Ohio State's been on him longer, but the coach that was on him is at Notre Dame now and is still recruiting him. As you've said, he's doing a really good job with Kingston.
He is.
Right?
He is.
So that's one where you say, boy, this is the one you got to win this one because it's back and forth. You know, I say that Notre Dame has a slight lead, but Ohio State is right there. The Ohio State people, according to Archer, I believe Archer said this, that the Ohio State people think that they lead with a slight lead. So regardless, it's really tight. It's going to come down to who can close the best.
Yes.
And that's going to be the big test for it's got to be Al Washington. It's got to be Al Golden. It's got to be Max Bulla. It's got to be Chad Bowden. And it's got to be Marcus Freeman.
Yep.
Like they all got to be involved in closing this one. And this one would be a big one for everything that we just mentioned, Ryan. So there's certainly another bellwether recruit, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, there's no question that if Notre Dame wants Kingston Viliamu-Asa in their class, like, yes, they do. Ohio State also wants him very much in their class. He's a really good football player, man, from a great school, from a religious background that is a very deep believer in faith. And that's a big part of his recruitment as well, is that's why he's been so drawn to Notre Dame to the end, is that faith is really important to him. His religious background is very important to him. So yeah, from a personal perspective, from a player perspective, from a territorial perspective, from a school perspective, you got to get a guy like Kingston, man. He just checks so many boxes of a guy that you need on this program. That would be a nice little like double take, for some California kids to be like, oh, he's going to Notre Dame, huh? That's interesting. So yeah, I think you need the St. John Bosco product in Kingston Viliamu-Asa, because he's a kid that you want. And he's a kid that honestly you need in this class, because there's been more questions than answers at linebacker in 2024.
Here's another one. Part of being an elite staff is really being able to flip kids that are, wow, that's an interesting one. Wow, that's an impressive flip. They've flipped kids before, Ryan. They've flipped some kids, I believe, in this class, right? I mean, I'm drawing a blank here, but
Carson Hobbs
from South Carolina. That was the one that I was thinking of. They flipped kids last year. They flip kid. You're always going to have flip kids, but can you flip a big time kid from a big time school in the SEC? That matters a whole lot more to me than flip an Ohio kid, a Catholic school Ohio kid that's committed to South Carolina. Like, that's one you should do, right? And Carson's a Notre Dame kid, right? Well, so's Caleb Beasley. But the difference is Carson is from Ohio.
Yep.
Caleb is from Tennessee.
Yes.
That to me it's not so much that we know Mike Mickens can recruit at a high level. He's already proven that. But now it's like, okay, can he take that to the next level and go into Tennessee's backyard and flip a Caleb Beasley? To me, that's one of those bellwethers that says this Notre Dame team this Notre Dame coaching staff is really dangerous right now at this point in time. That would be one of those ripple effect recruitments as well. Like, I think they're like, holy moly, Notre Dame flipped that kid. So if at that time Justin Scott's still uncommitted, or Kingston's still uncommitted, or some of these safeties are uncommitted, and you're like, yo, you went down to Tennessee and flipped a kid from an SEC school in their backyard. Oh boy, that's going to be interesting.
It would be. I mean, and Caleb Beasley, first and foremost, is a kid that Notre Dame has wanted for ever. I mean, you go back to the Irish Invasion last year, where CJ Carr and Cam Williams and Jack Larson and all those cats were at. I mean, Caleb Beasley was a part of that group that Notre Dame was so high on. And I think that, obviously Tennessee rode the momentum of last season and the excitement that was behind the 2022 season for them. But I think you really have a big opportunity, because one, you have a chance to prove yourself on the field this year to a guy like a Caleb Beasley, but also, what if Tennessee takes a little bit of a step back? He is a perfect flip candidate, because there was a lot of factors that I think could go into making this decision a little bit easier for him. I really do. And I mean, at the baseline of everything, he would become your best cornerback in the 2024 class, excuse me. And if we're talking about having Caleb Beasley, Leonard Moore, and Carson Hobbs as your three, feel pretty good about that, man. Like, that's a really good class. I mean, Coach Mickens, at that point, Brian, you're like, yeah, he proved that he could recruit at a high level already. That's like a completely different echelon of momentum there, man, because it's just because Caleb Beasley, in my opinion, is a legit top 100 player. And I think he could be a top 50 player when it's all said and done. I think he has that type of talent. Leonard Moore, I would have as a top 150 player, borderline top 100 player. Carson Hobbs still needs development, obviously. I think we both see him pretty similarly. Mm-hmm. But if Carson's your developmental third corner in this class, when you got Caleb Beasley and Leonard Moore, you're in a good spot. And it also, a little bit of foresight here, Cam Hart's going after the season. Clarence Lewis is going to be a senior, and Benjamin Morrison is probably going to be one of these guys next year at this time. We're like, you need to start preparing for after his junior year, because if he continues on his progression.
And you're losing Thomas Harper as well, because some of these kids are going to be viewed as nickel guys. Like Carson Hobbs especially, I look at and say, boy, that's a guy that I would love to see, like almost the minute he gets on campus, be put right in a slot, like right in a slot, and see what he can do. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan? Like, I mean, this is kind of off topic, but I that's the one thing when I do see Carson, I feel like, because like my only concern with Carson is just speed. That's my biggest concern with him, right? He's instinctive, he's physical. I just question the speed as a guy that can play on the outside all by himself. And if he answers the speed question, then I'm good on Carson. I'm really good there. And his track times have been good. I mean, his 4x100 team is really good that he's on, is a part of, right? But even if the speed checks out, I mean, there's something about his game that I love in the slot.
He's got that little swagger to him too. Like he talks
physical,
and
he'll hit.
I get it.
He's got good ball skills. He can come down. He can block, destruct. I mean, all those things that you really need in the slot. And if his speed doesn't check out like I hope, you can protect him a little bit more in the slot in that regard as well. So, but if his speed checks out, I still like him in the slot. I'd still love to see him as a slot boundary guy, in my opinion.
And you can, if you got three corners in the class, you don't have to worry about having that potential. Like you just do it if you want to do it.
Right. So let's move on to the last one for me, Ryan. And I think this is a position where you can name several guys, in my view, and that's safety. And to me, there's two bellwether recruits, and I'm gonna that immediately pop into my head, and I'm gonna go with one of them here, and that's DeJuan Lane from Baltimore Gilman. And this is one of those ones where it's a lot of these bellwethers, Ryan, it's multi-layered. Yeah. This one is multi-layered as well. Number one is you're getting an incredibly high ceiling safety, in my opinion, in DeJuan Lane. He's far from a finished product. I mean, he's raw, but you and I don't question Chris O'Leary's ability to coach and develop. We question his ability to recruit.
Yes.
And so you get a kid like this, and you're giving a guy that we think's a pretty good developer, a outstanding raw ball of clay with a lot of talent. But it also is about, can you beat some teams that want this kid that do a lot better in that region than you do?
Yeah, because Notre Dame hasn't done well in Maryland recently, man. Like, they haven't done well in the DMV for whatever.
No, they have not.
Not fully DMV, but yeah, they haven't done well.
But you know who does
DC,
well in that
Maryland,
area? Penn State and Michigan.
Yeah.
Both do very well in that area.
Yeah.
And Georgia's after him. His top five, his final five is Georgia, Michigan, Penn State, Maryland, and Notre Dame. If you can beat those schools for a kid from Baltimore Gilman, a private school in that what have we said since you and I have been doing this show? One area that we want to see this staff have more success in, and they're trying. I'll give them this. They're trying.
The St. Francis's and the
They are down there in D.C., Maryland a ton. They were there in the early winter. They've been out there multiple times, multiple coaches. This time they're trying. But eventually the attempt has to get into results. And DeJuan Lane is a guy that I look at and say, not only are you landing a safety with a ton of talent, 6'3", speed, athletic, can play the post, can play the alleys, could play receiver if you needed him to, Ryan. I mean, really.
I mean, he said on Twitter one time, Brian, that he ran a 10.5 100-meter hand time, which again, hand time, but still, dude, that's insane for his size. Like, that's nuts.
So, that's a guy, Ryan, that you say just everything that goes into it, not just the talent, the potential, the upside. That's huge. But now you're going and you're beating teams that want that kid, that recruit that area very, very well.
Yes.
And to me, that's the thing I look at and I say, that's why this one of all the safeties is a bell. Like Davis Andrews is a very important recruit.
Yeah.
But is he a bellwether? Kid from
Jalen
Utah?
McClain would be a bellwether if
he was
they
my
were in
other
the
one.
game.
When I said one of two, and the reason I'm going with DeJuan Lane is because I don't know that there's anything the Notre Dame coaching staff can do about Jalen McClain.
Sure.
And they've tried that one, and it just you're going to lose some. That's the reality of it. I don't care. Bama loses kids, Georgia loses kids. Nobody gets every kid that they want. So it's to me, DeJuan Lane is a guy that, to me, Jalen McClain's the better prospect right now. DeJuan Lane has the highest ceiling of any safety on the board for me.
Agree.
Right now,
Agree.
Notre Dame.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what I want to see them have. But I'll be honest, losing Jalen McClain doesn't concern me about the future of Notre Dame recruiting because A, they put in a good effort, and B, they have success in Jersey. They've proven success in Jersey. I'm not worried about that. This particular kid just was looking for things that Notre Dame, doesn't offer. And that's not a bad thing. That's totally fine. It is what it is. DeJuan Lane, to me, not only is a big-time player with every bit the ceiling, if not a higher ceiling than Jalen McClain, but it's that you would get into an area you just haven't had a ton of success.
Yeah.
And you were able to kind of beat Penn State for Cam Hart, right? But you haven't had a lot of wins. You need to start to string some wins in that area together, and DeJuan Lane, to me, would be a great start. He would be an absolutely great start for me.
He would
be. And so it's a great start in regard to that region. He would be they already have a safety in the class, but it'd be a great one in that region. Would be very, very important.
And it's a big need, obviously, at safety in 2024. It's massive, man. I mean, not only just impacts, but also you need numbers in 2024. You need at least 3 safeties. And I think that you can't just load up good football players, right? Like, you need to start getting some premier talents. You know what's funny, Brian, is I think it was On 3 that has DeJuan Lane listed as a 3-star linebacker, which is pretty hysterical when you think about it. But yeah. But I mean, regardless, man, Maryland is a place Notre Dame needs to have more success in. They've had a couple misses recently. I mean, you think about Jason Moore last year, obviously out of DeMatha Catholic. You need to be able to go into that spot and have some success. If Penn State can do it, Notre Dame needs to be able to do it too. That's just point blank. I mean, they're a school that has, I mean, especially when Brent Pry was still there, like they were just killing Virginia and Maryland and all the spots, right? You need to be able to impact that area if you're Notre Dame, and DeJuan Lane would be a great example and a great beacon of hope that, like, hey, man, we can do this a little bit. Like, we can get down there, because what happens next? 2025 with the corners with Blake Woodby and Kevin Humes out of St. Francis Academy, for instance, right? Like, getting down there. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, who is the cousin or the brother, brother, of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Like, getting those types of players, starting that pipeline is important. It has to start somewhere. Why not with DeJuan Lane? Why not? Make it happen.
I think one thing that we could say, Ryan, is it is a little bit disconcerting that there's not more than one guy in this conversation. Really. And I know Jalen McClain, you could say him, but like, I don't know that I would call Davis, as much as I like Davis Andrews, I don't know that I'd call him a bellwether recruit, just because there's certain factors that are a little bit unique to his recruitment. Also, he's from Utah. Because again, Bellwether isn't just a talented player. It's a talented player that has other things that show you that this staff is big time. Right?
Unique area, big offer list.
In my opinion, Davis Andrews is going to do one of two things: go to Notre Dame or go to Utah or BYU. If he goes to Utah or BYU, it's because he's making a decision based on being a Mormon more so than a football decision, which I have no problem with. That's not a criticism. It's understandable because it would mean that he's going to go on a mission, and it's just easier for kids to manage that at schools that are used to that being a normal thing. They know how to deal with that much more so than most other schools.
Yeah.
I wouldn't fault Notre Dame if they lose Davis Andrews to one of those two schools. Now, if you lose him to UCLA or Tennessee, that's a problem.
Yes.
But I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm not really worried about that. I'm more concerned about losing him to BYU or Utah. So that doesn't necessarily speak to being a bellwether for me. So what does is a kid like DeJuan Lane. The kids from Texas, Menke and Oliver Miles, are not bellwethers to me because you're not beating Texas and Oklahoma for those kids.
Yeah, they're just good players. Yeah.
Yeah, they've got some upside. Kennedy Urlacher was not a bellwether to me. That's a guy you should have got, right? I mean, if we're being honest with you, especially when you look at the schools that are offering them. There's just not a lot of those guys in the class. And part of it is because it's not a great safety class, which we've established that already. It's not a great national safety class. I don't fault Notre Dame for not getting Peyton Woodyard for a number of reasons, one of which I'm not as high on Peyton Woodyard now as I was when he was a sophomore. I just think he's one of those guys that's just gotten a little stiffer and a little slower as he's gotten older, in my opinion. And, he's looking for things that I don't think Notre Dame wants to get involved in, to be completely honest with you. I'm not talking about financial, just, there's just, I don't even want to get into it because he's not a Notre Dame target. I don't fault him for that one. It is concerning, though, that there just aren't more guys on the board that you look at and say, boy, this is a really important guy that would signify this. And maybe part of it's because we don't think about it. But here's what they're going to have to do, bigger picture at safety, Ryan, is you're going to have to find some high upside guys that you develop, because that's the one thing I'll say is if they can land some high upside guys, that there's a level of confidence that they're going to be okay, because I do trust the coaching at safety with Chris O'Leary. I just don't trust the recruiting. I'd rather get a bunch of DeJuan Lanes than a bunch of guys who maybe are lower floors, because DeJuan Lane's a ceiling guy, but he's got a little bit of a higher floor than a lot of the other guys on the board as well.
Yep.
But I'll say this, like a very intriguing option for me is the kid they offered last night, Malcolm Ziegler. That's a very intriguing one to me. But again, not a bellwether.
No.
DeJuan Lane's the bellwether. So that's kind of that breakdown, Ryan. That's 6 guys. Well, 5 guys in one position, because I think we kind of talked about 2 at running back, that you look at and say the greater success that you have in that group. Now, you argued that maybe Elijah Rushing could be on the list. The reason we didn't include him, Ryan, we should discuss it, is obviously that would be a big one. He would be a big one. That would certainly be a bellwether. There's guys out there like that, wow, if you somehow get this kid that we're not expecting you to get, that's huge. Number one, at the end of the day, you and I still don't expect them to get him. And number 2 is I kind of feel like there's a situation, Ryan, where part of the reason that Justin Scott's a bellwether, for example, is because there's nobody else on the board, and it's a position that you're not really recruiting necessarily well.
Sure.
When you look at the defensive end class they had a year ago, the year before that, when you talk about Aiden Gobira, Josh Burnham, and Junior Tuihalamaka still being edges from that class. Last year, you expect at least 2 of the kids from last year to stay on the edge. And you go out and get Cole Mullins, Bryce Young, and Logan Thomas. I'm not hammering you for defensive end recruiting. That's pretty good. That's some really high ceilings you're working with there. And not just high ceilings, but higher floors. I think Cole Mullins has a higher floor than he's given credit for. I think he's a top 150 football player. I think Logan Thomas is a borderline top 100 football player. His floor is more about Matt Bayless than it is about Al Washington. Because you could say, well, hey, Al Washington has proven himself as a developer of defensive line. That's fair. I mean, I'd say he has at other places. He just didn't at Notre Dame. We'll see how he does this year. But to me, Logan Thomas being a really good player at Notre Dame has more to do with Matt Bayless than it does about Al Washington. And I'm not worried about that. That's one you feel good about. So I would say, boy, you give me those 3 kids, and I'm not overly concerned about defensive end recruiting. Now, all of a sudden, Elijah Rushing's like, okay, now you're seriously you're really loading up now. But that's why we didn't include him as a bellwether, but you could make a case that he could be in that conversation. And if you get him, he is a bellwether. That would say a lot about Notre Dame. But the 6 that we went with are guys that we think are more, I'd say, maybe more realistic. It wouldn't be, none of those would be upsets. Some of them might be a little surprised, like that's a big win, but they're not. Wait a minute, hold on. Notre Dame got who? I didn't know they were even a player for that guy. That's more of what Elijah Rushing is, where these are guys that, in all honesty, Gearby Lambert, Justin Scott are guys that Notre Dame should flat out get. They should not lose those guys, right? So when you look at Bellwether being a predictor of this is a big-time recruiting staff, those guys would signify that to me. Elijah Rushing would just be kind of like, okay, now you're just now you're just
showing off.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it, Ryan.
Yeah.
Like now you're just showing off, right? But I if I were to criticize Al Washington for defensive end recruiting, if they got Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins, and Bryce Young, it would be like, dude, did that guy say mean things to you? Like, did he hurt you somehow? Like, what's your deal? And I'm not going to do that. That's good. Interior recruiting, okay, we can have a different conversation. But edge recruiting, you give me Cole Mullins, Logan Thomas, and Bryce Young caliber players every year at defensive end for Notre Dame, I have no worries about the future of the defensive end position at Notre Dame. Do you, Ryan?
No. I mean, as long as they can get developed properly, yeah.
Right.
I don't have any. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel good about it. So those are the bellwethers there.
That's the Bellwethers. And we're going to get into our last segment. Before we do, though, please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, hit that notification bell to know when one of our great shows are coming up, and you get that great notification for it. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, hit that 5-star review for us as well, folks. Go to boards@irishbreakdown.com for all the great conversation, intel, and everything that you need to get ready for the Notre Dame season. So, Brian, now we are talking final topic of the day, and I think it's an interesting one. This conversation came up a little bit on Tuesday's show about a couple of the players that are transferring from Notre Dame this offseason. And I made a post about this on Twitter yesterday. And I think we talked about this maybe on the show yesterday, or maybe this is just a conversation we had in private. But when you take a step back over the last couple weeks, you have lost 3 players from Notre Dame's team that at some point in their careers, you felt like their future of Notre Dame was going to be incredibly bright, okay? One is Tyler Buchner, who was the starting quarterback to begin the 2022 season, obviously got injured in game 2, and we all know the story at this. He brought in Sam Hartman. He got beat out. He's transferred to Alabama to potentially be their starting quarterback. He's at least going to fight for it. You lost also Lorenzo Styles, who was expected to be your top receiver in 2022, struggled with some mental stuff and to really get the production to where you want it to be. And then obviously this offseason, he got kind of supplanted on the depth chart, and then he was potentially going to be the corner. Ultimately ends up transferring to Ohio State, where he's going to play corner for Ohio State in the future. The third was more recent one, Logan Diggs, who we know has been wrestling with the idea of going closer to home for basically since he got to Notre Dame. Decides he wants to transfer to LSU. And part of it is wants to be close at home. Other part of it is he wants to be the guy and be able to potentially be the RB1 and to get the main carries. And we know that at Notre Dame, at least in 2023, that wasn't going to be the case because you have Audric Estime coming back at least, right? So you had 3 players, and I would quantify it like this. And I did quantify it like this on Twitter, and some people didn't like this. Most people didn't disagree with it, actually, though.
I think the people that didn't like it didn't understand what you were saying.
Yes. Well,
I don't think they understood the point you were making. Especially the Ohio State guy. He definitely didn't understand what you were.
He definitely didn't understand.
Like when he was like, that's a weird flex. You're like, bro, we're not. You're
who's flexing? Right. Who's flexing? No one's flexing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is how I would quantify it, Brian. There is a narrative out there against Notre Dame that there is just this lack of talent. They don't have talent on that football team. Just not enough of it. So in one offseason, you lost a quarterback who was going to be your backup quarterback in 2023. Could have potentially been the future in 2024. But in 2023, he was going to be the backup to Sam Hartman, barring something catastrophic happening, an injury or whatever. You're talking about a backup quarterback that is now going to go to the University of Alabama to fight for the starting job. That's why they brought Tyler Buchner down there. Not to just be a depth piece and just sit on the bench. He is coming there to compete with the Jalen Milrows, with the Ty Simpsons, with the 2 incoming freshmen to be the starting quarterback at the University of Alabama. Wide receiver-wise for Notre Dame, they lost Lorenzo Styles, who, if he would have stayed at wide receiver and stayed at Notre Dame this year, was probably going to be, 4th or 5th receiver on this team? More than likely?
Best 4th, most likely 5th, because they were pushing Chris Tyree for a reason.
Yes.
And he was pretty much almost exclusively outside this spring because of the push of Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse. And you could argue, and this is what I've been told by sources before Lorenzo transferred, that Lorenzo needs to worry more about Rico Flores passing than him catching Tobias Merriweather. which is why they started working with him at corner, why he was getting reps at corner, because they were
Yep.
eventually going to make that Notre Dame was eventually going to make that transition full time.
Yes.
And of course, he's now doing it at Ohio State, where
Yeah.
I think he'll do well there. I mean, this
I hope he
isn't
does.
about
I hope
that,
he
but
does well.
yes, continue, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the whole point, though, is that a player that was either going to be a 4th to 5th wide receiver or a developmental cornerback on your team in 2023 is now at Ohio State's a player that they're going to develop on the defensive side of the football, who I think they have high hopes for. The last guy is Logan Diggs, who I'd put it like this. Logan Diggs was going to be your second running back behind Audric Estime, was still going to carry the ball a ton. He was still going to be a really good player for you. But there are other talented running backs that are nipping at his heels a little bit and could potentially have taken carries from him. So clear number 2.
Yeah. I think that part gets a little bit overstated by some, but it is fair because pre-injury, he was getting beat out by Jadarian Price. We still don't know if that's going to continue. But your point is accurate, Ryan. At best, he's 1B.
Yes.
So Audric Estime is 1A.
So
it's a loss. That's the thing.
Yeah,
people are like, oh, y'all act like y'all ain't lose. We're not saying these are not losses. That's not the point of what we're saying. Of Ryan's point. That's not
my only negative back and forth on that post was me between another Notre Dame fan who was trying to say Logan Diggs sucks. And I'm like, no, he's good. It's a loss. It's like it's yeah. But anyway, regardless, you lost your 1B or number 2 running back to LSU because he wants to be the guy at LSU. And obviously there has to be a conversation that's happening of like, hey, Logan, if you come here, you compete to be the top back on the roster.
Right.
That competition happens.
And he probably will be.
Yeah. So you lost a running back who was your 2nd or 1B running back to a team that more than likely will probably be their top back on the roster. You lost your backup quarterback to Alabama, who is fighting to be the starter there. And then you lost a wide receiver who's converting to cornerback to Ohio State. 3 players that were going to be backups or departmentalized complementary pieces are now going to different situations in Alabama, LSU, and Ohio State. 3 pretty good programs, by the way, to potentially have bigger roles on their football team.
Right.
And I think
2 of them for sure. 2 of them for sure. Yeah.
And I think you look at that situation for me, Brian, I think there's 2 ways to look at this as far as what the outcome is going to be. Because I think that says a lot about Notre Dame's talent on the board. I think it says a lot about the talent on the roster that is the situation where you lose those guys and you're like, it's okay. And it's a, they're going to big programs. I think that is a big like pat on the back of like, hey man, you guys have some talent there, obviously. But I think there's 2 outcomes that people are going to look at it this way. I've heard both sides. One is that you want them all to play well because that shows you that there is a lot of talent at the University of Notre Dame. And that showcases that, wow, that guy that was fighting to be a 1A in a running back committee is 1,000-yard running back in the SEC now, right? A quarterback starting at Alabama was going to be the backup at Notre Dame.
And by the way, I think he will be. I think he will be a 1,000-yard rusher at Alabama.
Probably.
Or at, at LSU this year. I do.
And I think that is a big potential pat on the back to Notre Dame and a big indicator that mantra of Notre Dame doesn't have talent is just false, one. But I think the other side, Brian, and someone brought this up, and I think it's a great talking point, is that some people say it's actually a bad thing if they play really well. If they don't play well, if they play well, that means that Notre Dame wasn't able to get the most out of them. So I wanted to open up this conversation, man, because I think it's a fascinating one. What does it say about Notre Dame if those guys are all successful?
Well, number one, I think that there's 2 layers to this, Ryan. Number one is it says a lot that when you look at who's coming for Notre Dame's transfers. You mentioned those guys, but Prince Colley's transferring to an SEC school. I think Caleb Johnson, who was never going to have really much of a chance at all at playing offensive line at Notre Dame, is going to one of the better group of 5 schools in SMU. There's heck, one of Notre Dame's walk-ons is going to Nebraska. The Liebenbrandt kid is going to Nebraska. So when you look at,
I didn't even see that one.
Yeah, it could be as a walk-on, but still, he's going to Nebraska. Their top guys. Drew Pine, a guy who was going to be Notre Dame's 3rd-string quarterback this year if he stayed, is expected to start at a Pac-12 school. And, Jacob Lacey goes to Oklahoma. Jaden Bellamy was never going to play at Notre Dame as a defensive back, and he's going to Syracuse. I mean, so like Power 5 schools are trying to raid Notre Dame's roster of guys that were just not starters. And part of the reason Jacob Lacey left is because Notre Dame wouldn't promise him that he'd be a starter. Well, now you see why. Because I don't know if Jacob Lacey starts for Notre Dame this year with Riley Mills moving inside and Howard Cross being there. He'd have played a bunch, and he'd have been a very important player. This is not meant to say that Jacob Lacey would not have been an important player or that I wouldn't have wanted him back. I would want him back. I would much rather have Jacob Lacey in the rotation than not in the rotation. He wants to be the guy. That's fair. That's fine. Whatever. Do what you got to do. I don't like it. I don't like how he did it. If he would have waited till after the season and left, all right, you do you, buddy. I root for you. Love you and your family, and best of luck to you. I just don't like the way he did it. But it says a lot. Like there's this notion going around, this silly notion going around, like, well, just Notre Dame just doesn't have the talent of other teams. And I'm like, they don't have the talent of Georgia and Alabama, and to a degree, Ohio State at some spots, right? But that's the list is short of teams that have a better roster than Notre Dame. And that's what's so frustrating about some of the results we've seen from Notre Dame in recent years. But also, what makes it frustrating about kind of how they're discussed. I mean, you throw Michigan in the conversation. I mean, Michigan's roster is really talented. I mean, but the list of teams that are in the conversation for Notre Dame is not long. It's not like Notre Dame's the 13th best roster. That's nonsense. Because as you mentioned, Alabama's hoping that Notre Dame's backup quarterback becomes their starter. LSU is hoping that Notre Dame's 1B at running back is going to become a bell cow for them.
Their guy, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that he will. So I think it shows with their roster. But then it's the other part of it too, Ryan, is what does it say for Notre Dame if they're successful? What does that mean for Notre Dame? And should Notre Dame fans root for them? Well, number one, I think you should root for those kids. For me personally, I'm absolutely wanting Tyler Buckner to be successful at Alabama, and I'm wanting Logan Diggs to be successful at LSU. I got no beef with those kids. I don't think Logan was ever comfortable at Notre Dame. I think he always wanted to go back closer to home. Okay, that's fine. I transferred after my freshman year. I can't fault the kid for transferring, whether I like his reasons or not. It doesn't matter. I got no beef there. I'll flat out root for Jacob Lacey to be successful at Oklahoma. I absolutely want Prince Colley to be starting and playing well at Vanderbilt this year. I hope Caleb Johnson has a great career at SMU, and I hope Joe Wilkins finishes his career off with a bang at Miami of Ohio. I want all those kids to be successful. There's really only one kid who I'm apathetic about, and has nothing to do with football or they left Notre Dame and all that. I'm not going to get into that. But personally, I have no issue with these kids, Lee. None of them to me that I just mentioned left on any kind of bad terms where I'm like, dude, you did it wrong. You're a bad person. Jacob Lacey, I don't agree with how he went about it, but I know I got to know Jacob and his family very well. I love the Laceys. They're great people. I just disagree with this decision. That's okay. You can still respect someone and disagree, right? I'm sure there's things that I do that you disagree with, but I don't think it means that you dislike me or I'm a bad person or you want to leave the company. That's part of life, Yep. It's like, I hope not anyway. But so there's that. There's just, I'm not petty, so I'm not going to, and I don't think the kids that I just mentioned, like I have no beef with Prince Colley. I have no beef with Logan Diggs. I have no beef with Tyler Buckner and all those guys. I get all of it. Yep. The second part of it is I think it is good for Notre Dame if their kids go to other places, because I think there comes a point in time where it starts to become impactful on the recruiting trail. When, hey, look, I'm going to go to Notre Dame, but I know if it doesn't work out, I'm still going to have Power 5 school options to go play. Yeah. Man, no. Hey, look, I'm going to go there. I'm going to battle at running back, but if I get beat out at running back, I know I can transfer to an SEC school and rush for 1,000 yards. Or I can go to an SEC school, one of the best teams in the country, and be the starting quarterback if I get beat out by CJ Carr. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's huge for Notre Dame. And it's also big for Notre Dame if some of the not big names do that. So, Prince Colley being a really good linebacker at Vanderbilt. Caleb Johnson going out and being a multi-year starter at SMU would be very good for Notre Dame, in my opinion. Because what it says is, hey, you can go to Notre Dame, and if things don't work out, there's going to be big-time options for you, right? It's the same argument we've used for assistant coaches. You're going to attract better assistant coaches if they know if there's a track record that if I go to Notre Dame and do my job, Alabama OC job is waiting for me. Right. Louisville OC job is waiting for me, which then gets sprungboard a year later to a head coaching job. The Boston College OC job is waiting for me. Those are not hypotheticals, Ryan. Those are
happened.
where
Yeah.
Notre Dame coaches have left for in recent seasons.
Sure.
Michigan, a promotion going to Michigan coming off a playoff team is there for me. There's opportunities there. The head coach at an SEC school is there for me. A D coordinator job at a SEC school is there for me, which then leads to me getting a head coaching job at a Power 5. Not one of those things was a hypothetical. Go to what it was like early in Brian Kelly's tenure. Like Charlie Molnar leaving for like UMass. You know what I mean? Like those were the jobs that guys were getting. Chuck Martin leaves from Miami of Ohio, right? Like those are not like, oh, wow, gee, I want to go to Notre Dame, so I give me that Miami of Ohio job, But that's changed in recent years, especially the last 2 to 3 years. It's the same thing for recruiting. Kids are going to be more willing to go play for you, knowing you have depth on your roster, if they think they're going to get developed to the point. It's get back to that development conversation to where, hey, if I don't work out or if a guy beats me out, I know that big time schools are going to be looking at Notre Dame's roster, and I can go there and start there and do what I do. That's why Buckner and Colley and Diggs and those guys having success is something Notre Dame fans should want and actively root for. Now, I want Tyler Buckner to play well in every game next year except maybe one, and that's if they play Notre Dame in the postseason.
Yep.
That's it, right? Logan Diggs, dude, I hope Logan goes out and balls out. I do. I got no beef with Logan Diggs. I think he's a very good football player. And if he can go to LSU, a team that people think is better than Notre Dame, and we'll see if they are or aren't. That's a different conversation for another day. But if he can go there and ball out and be like, hey, man, I don't need to be worried about Notre Dame's running back depth chart because they're going to let me compete.
Yep.
And if I don't make it, I can go somewhere else and ball out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's good for Notre Dame if those guys play well. And I would hope that Notre Dame fans recognize that and say, hey, look, I'm rooting for these kids.
I think most did. I think most did too when I posted that yesterday. Like I think most did. It was what's funny, Brian, is I didn't have any LSU fans really in the mentions. I didn't have any Alabama fans in the mentions. It was all Ohio State, man. That was the only one. I was like,
and they completely misread what you were saying. Well, it's because one of the guys from Kevin Noon is a guy that works for Rivals. So he's one of the big names that covers the team. And so when he responds with a complete lack of understanding of what you said, then the rest of the cronies are going to respond with the wrong interpretation of what you said.
It was funny too, in my little back and forth, because I know Kevin, he's a nice guy for the most part too, and he was like, he said something like, he said Lorenzo Styles left because Notre Dame asked him to move the corner. And I was like, Kevin, why do you think he was asked to move the corner? Because he was going to be the fourth or fifth wide receiver.
Right, exactly. And why is he going to go to receiver to corner at Ohio State? It's, because that was basically going to happen.
Yes.
So it was like, wow, dude, you're really not getting this.
Yeah.
And it was
the best was that he was replying to other people and he didn't reply to that question. I was like, yeah, I got you, buddy.
Exactly. Exactly. It was really weird. It was really weird. It was kind of funny. I almost got jumped in on a couple of them. I was like, no, Ryan's got this. I'm still trying to stick to my not engaging people on Twitter other than answering some questions from Notre Dame.
You would have been proud of me, man. I muted that tweet at one point, so I didn't answer to anybody anymore. So I am
proud of you because I was like, oh, this is going to get interesting. The more these Buckeyes start responding, Ryan's about to go off. So, yeah, I mean, that's – and look, somebody said, like, Antoine said, I like Kevin Noon. He's the only I have no issue with Kevin Noon.
No, Kevin's a nice guy.
I was on a show with Kevin once with Mark Rogers. I got no beef with Kevin Noon. It's just he clearly misunderstood the point you were making, took it as some sort of insult, and then just refused to like, oh, you know what? I misread that. My bad. Like, just refused to see that. And then, of course, all the followers jumped in with their own, like, just living up to like his misunderstanding. It was just like, you're continuing to miss the point. If Lorenzo Styles was the starting X at Notre Dame, it's now the Z. If he was the starting wide receiver for Notre Dame right now, does anyone think he transfers and is going to move to corner at Ohio State? Does anyone actually think that?
Nope.
If he's going to be the guy that we thought he was going to be a couple years ago, the number one receiver, does he transfer? No, of course he doesn't transfer.
No.
This doesn't mean Lorenzo doesn't have talent or ability. It's just that clearly other dudes had passed him up.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yep.
And he was, and the gap was only widening. I mean, every day they had a practice, the gap between him and Tobias Merriweather widened deeper, and Jaden Thomas deeper and deeper and deeper. And when you get beat out by a guy younger than you, this is the point you made about Tyler Buckner and the danger for him at Alabama. If you get beat out at quarterback, you're getting beat out by a quarterback that's going to be younger than you. Where do you go now? When you just graduate and then transfer where you can play after you graduate. So that's kind of where it's at, Ryan. But I think it's a very good thing for Notre Dame if those guys go and have success. Now they don't all have to, but if most of them do.
Yeah.
I don't know what to expect from Prince Colley at linebacker. I don't know enough about their linebacker situation there, but I have to think that Prince Colley is going to have a chance if healthy to go play there.
I think so. I think they lost their best linebacker from last year, so there should be some options, I think. And he's with two because Nick Lazinski's there too, right? With Clark Lee now. So
recruited him. Yeah, Nick Lazinski played a bigger role in getting and this isn't an insult to Coach Lee, because Coach Lee had a lot of faith in Nick Lazinski. So it was more of a kind of like how they were with James Laurinaitis. They let Nick do recruiting because Coach Lee had faith in Nick Lazinski. So when I say that Nick Lazinski had as much, if not more, of a role in getting Prince Colley, it's not meant to demean Clark Lee. It's actually meant to compliment him, because he recognized Nick's talent as a coach and a recruiter. He would let Nick coach certain parts of the linebacking core. I mean, there was a lot of faith there that he was a guy that could do the job at a high level. Now I think Nick is the full-time linebackers coach now, correct? He's now a full-time assistant.
I believe so.
I believe he is. So I'm actually going to look that up, because I really like Nick, and really good guy. Was always willing to answer questions for me and things like that. And I thought he did a really good job. Players loved him. I mean, the players really loved them. And so Nick Lazinski is now the defensive run game coordinator and linebackers coach. So that's great.
Good for him.
That's great. Yeah.
Oh, he's a run game coordinator too, huh?
Good defensive run game coordinator. Yeah.
Good for him.
That's great. I like Nick a lot. So when I say that, it's not meant to insult Clark Lee at all. But I hope he balls out and plays well. I hope Caleb Johnson wins a starting job on offensive tackle for SMU this year.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it plays out, Ryan. But I do think those are good things for Notre Dame to have happened. So.
100%. And I totally understand the other side of it, but I think that just a healthy conversation to have. I think that it shows health of the program is more than anything for me. So
for me, the only time I'll say this, I can't think of a scenario where I would root against a kid.
Right.
But there are scenarios, including guys that have left Notre Dame this offseason, where I don't really give a rip if you have success or not. Don't care. I don't like the way you conducted yourself. I don't like the attitude you had. I don't care. But I'm not rooting against you. It's literally an apathy.
Like indifference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas with Tyler, with Logan, I want them. I genuinely, not even just for Notre Dame, but for them, want them to have success.
Yeah.
And so, but again, it's also, like I said, it's also good for Notre Dame. It really is. And I think most fans are that way. And the people that aren't are more like the Twitter people that just, you're dead to me now that you're not at Notre Dame, or just say, okay.
Right. I love those people.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I get the frustration, but it's just more about none of them left on terms that I feel are warrant that. But anyway, that's going to do it for this portion of the show, Ryan. We're going to move on to the mailbag next. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Mr. Roberts, it is mailbag time, my friend, and we are going to rock and roll through these as quickly as we can. We're going to start off with a super chat from Raymond Harton, who, by the way, is a member of the message board, folks. So Raymond is one of the many here that are part of the Notre Dame message board.
Yep. Thank you so much for the super chat, Raymond. I've heard that people with R's that begin in their first name are really cool people. So thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you, guys. Appreciate all the hard work y'all do. And I know Brian didn't listen to a word I just said because he would have rolled his eyes or said something to me. But
I'm trying not to. I've noticed that I've kind of chastised you a few times for your stuff lately. So I'm trying to get better about that and not doing that. So
good.
Yeah. We'll move on to the next question. Okay. Two-parter from Rob Osgood.
We got two-parter here. Rob says, this year is pivotal. The landscape of college football is wide open. Notre Dame needs to show that they belong. With recruiting and the transfers, Notre Dame should have a breakout season, minimum 11 wins. Question is, how the schedule is laid out, how would you as a coach prepare for the season? Break it down in 3-game increments or per game, and how would you prepare preseason workouts? Thank you.
Well, I don't think preseason workouts change a whole lot based on how your schedule is situated from a conditioning type of standpoint. I think what I would say is when you start off with a little bit of a unique opponent or opponents that maybe aren't that good, I think it can maybe change like your install a little bit, and that those type of things could change. And so this year, because you're playing Navy first, you're going to do a lot more of that defensive install for the option in fall camp, where if you played, like, Notre Dame always will do a little bit of option in fall camp, but it's usually like a few days. Now you're going to obviously have to commit more to that, and I think that impacts your changes a little bit. But to me, when I look at this season, Ryan, and I know that in the past that we've seen coaches that have broken it down into like 4 quarters.
Yeah.
I'm more with this particular year, Ryan. For me, you could make a case that it's 3. Navy to Central Michigan is 1, Ohio State to USC is 2, and then Pitt to Wake to Stanford is 3. But I'm comfortable with the 4 quarters one, because if you break it into the 4 quarters, and which means 3 opponents at a time, you basically have one really huge game in each quarter. NC State on the road in quarter 1. You got to get through quarter 1 undefeated. You've got to beat Navy, Tennessee, and Central and NC State. And you get into quarter 2. You got a prep game for Ohio State with Central Michigan. Then you got your money game with Ohio State. Then you got your trap game against Duke. So mental focus is going to be huge in the game leading into and the game after the Ohio State game.
Yeah.
Then quarter 3, I would make the case. Quarter 3, you could argue, Ryan, is going to be the most challenging quarter for a couple reasons. Number one is you have USC at home, but Louisville and Pitt surround that, and you're getting a little deeper into the year, starting to get a little bit more wear and tear on you, starting to wear down a little bit. How are you going to be emotionally coming out of that Ohio State, quarter 2 week? But that at Louisville, home against USC, and home against Pitt is not going to be an easy stretch. And then there's some storylines involved. You've dominated USC the previous decade, but they had a very convincing victory over you last year. Was that a one-time thing because they had a 5-star quarterback, or is that a new pattern that's going to emerge?
Right.
That's what we're going to find out. And so that's something I'm curious to see. And then you've got the Jeff Brom guy that I know wanted the Notre Dame job in the past. The guy was at Purdue. He's coached against Notre Dame. He's now at his alma mater. That's going to be a storyline. Jack Plummer starting against you for the 3rd straight year for a 3rd different team, assuming he can hold off Brady Allen, who just committed to Pitt.
I saw that.
And then the Pitt game is going to be another Phil Dracovic game. I mean, that's a storyline, especially if Phil's healthy going into that game. That if Phil Dracovic is healthy, that game gets a lot more interesting. If he's not, then you should blow Pitt out. I mean, you should. And then you go to quarter 4, which is this is the one quarter, Ryan, where you kick the quarter off with a big game. You're coming out of a bye week. You get Pitt to end the quarter 3, and then you go right into quarter 4 with a road game at Clemson.
Yeah.
And that's the big one. You win that one, and you should be smooth sailing the rest of the way. With all due respect to Wake Forest and Stanford, those are games that if Notre Dame's in danger of losing those games, we have much bigger problems to worry about. That's kind of how I would handle breaking the season down from my preparation. But as a coach, how do I break it down? Simple. I'm worried about Navy right now.
100%.
And that's what you tell your player. I'm worried about Navy right now. With my staff, we would look at things like, hey, we're building towards this, guys. We're building our fall camp, and our prep going into the season is built towards, we got to go down to Raleigh and get that dub.
Right.
That, let's be honest. So, yes, we're preparing for Nate, but with my players and with my team and with the media, guys, I'm not worried about NC State right now. I'm not worried about Ohio State right now. We are so far away from me caring about the USC and Clemson games right now. I'm worried about beating Navy. And there's some truth to that. I mean, it is. And that's why you do focus that way. And then after that, it's like, okay, you've got the Tennessee State. Hey, I'm worried about Tennessee. And we all know, like, guys, come on. No, you're worried about NC State. But they're not going to say it. So there's 2 ways I look at it, Rob, is what I'm going to say publicly and to my team and then what me and my coaching staff are focusing on behind the scenes. There's two different ways to look at it.
The only thing I'll add to it, because I think there's merit to the quarters, to the 3-game stretches. Brian, I am just very happy for Notre Dame's sake that they get the triple option out of the way after game 1. I'm so happy about that, man. Just get that out of the way. There's nothing worse than like it being game 6 or 7, where it's like every week you have to do like a period of like, we still have to practice against it because we're going to see it down the road. Get the triple option out of the way, and then we'll talk about it in the 2023 off season at that point. Like, I don't want to talk about the triple option anymore. If I'm the Notre Dame coach anyway. On this podcast, I want to talk about the triple option all the time. But as a coach, no, don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
From Matt McCarthy, since there's a real chance that Maris Loifau, Jack Kaiser, and JD Bertrand aren't on the roster in 2024, how much do you think the staff will push the opportunity for early playing time to Kingston Viliamoasa, Shaw, and Chris
That's
Cole?
a kid from Alabama.
Yes,
Cole.
I know. His name just popped out of my head for some reason. Yeah. Brian Shaw, right?
How can you forget that name?
I know, man. I know. I'm sorry.
To me, the story is a little different for how I'm approaching Cole and Shaw than compared to Kingston, because I'm not sure that I'm pushing for playing time for those guys as much, because I don't know if they're guys that are going to be ready to play as freshmen. So my pitch would be a little bit, but for Kingston, sure, it's going to be a conversation. I'm not overselling it though.
Right.
Because look, it's going to be hard for Kingston to step into the starting lineup. Look, there's some pretty highly ranked players and very talented athletes above him on that as well. And the same is true at Ohio State. So it's not like that it matters. Ohio State's not promising him playing time. You're telling me they're going to promise him that he's going to come in and beat out CJ Hicks and all those guys as freshman year? No, they're not doing that. At least they better not. And if they are, I don't think Kingston's the kind of kid that will be as influenced by that, to be completely honest with you, Ryan. I don't know if that's something that, like there's some kids, you got to be smart about who you're talking to. And this is what good coaches understand. So if you are like I've used the story before with like Liam Eichenberg. And I remember talking to Liam when he was a recruit, and he was talking about how Urban Meyer kept telling him, you're going to come in and you can start for us as a freshman. And he was like, that was like the worst thing you could do with me, is because because Harry Heasan had to convince that he needed time to develop, and there's parts of his, because that's how Harry recruited. He didn't promise guys playing time. He hardly ever talked about playing as a freshman. He was, I'm going to develop you, and
especially at offensive line, man. I feel like that's so counterproductive.
Some kids want that. Some kids. I remember remember that linebacker from Nebraska a couple of years ago that Notre Dame was recruiting. I was like Devin Jackson, I think, or something like that. He was a really skinny, athletic kid. But I remember talking to him, and he was like, yeah, if I'm not in the lineup my first 2 years, I'm out. And I'm like, that's not the kind of kid that I want. But if you're going to recruit that kid, that's what you got to be talking to him about. It's important to him, is the point.
Right.
And so with Kingston, I don't know this for a fact, Ryan. You would know better than I do. He just doesn't strike me as the kind of kid that, yes, he wants an opportunity to come in and compete right away. But he's not a kid that's looking for a promise of, hey, you're going to come in and play as a freshman.
No, he's much more like full scope of why he's picking a school than anything. Because he's confident in himself, right? I mean, Kingston's going to come in. It's like a Jaden Greathouse kind of vibe, right, Brian? I mean, it's not quite like Jaden, because Jaden, you could tell, was like super confident all the time. But Kingston's one of those kids that's just like subtly confident, and he's just going to be like, yeah, I'm coming in to play. Like, who wouldn't type of kid? But he's not going to be like outwardly like, play me or I'm out of here type of thing. Like, no, that's not good. He's just going to come to work. And that's the kids I love, is the kids that want to come to work.
Yep. This is a very astute observation here from, let me find it here, from Gideon Rosa. Said Ryan is just loves talking triple option to annoy Brian. I think that's a very fair assessment.
I actually, Gideon, it's not fully true though. It's not.
You do like the triple option. You said you used to play it on NCAA all the time.
Playing against the triple option defensively.
Right. As a linebacker, sure.
Yes, sure. Yes. It's like, I have dive back all day. Awesome. Cool. That's all I got.
Well, here's another part of why I hate the triple option. So I played cornerback my senior year of high school, as well as quarterback. And so we were playing Liberty Christian my senior year. And that's where Gideon Davidson, now plays at running back. And so they had one of those old AstroTurf fields, because this is like 1996, right? And so first play of the game, they were a 2 tight end, double wing, triple option team back then.
Love it.
First play of the game, they come on a wheel, like the bat comes on around, He gets a handoff. He's coming right at me. I drill him. I drive him into the ground, and my arms just go just into the turf and just skin gone. You can actually, I don't know if you can see it now, but you can see it because I already had bad skin on my elbows anyway because I was a head first slider in baseball my whole childhood. And, man, just skin was gone. So I had to take my wristbands and put them around my elbows because it was also, those old turf fields, they'd put sand in them.
Yeah.
So not only do I have open skin on my elbows, but I have sand. So, like, that's why I'm like, okay, so triple option to me, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. So even playing it, because, again, Ryan, I'm a quarterback. So now I got to go throw with, like, ripped up elbows. Was not a big fan. It's not a big fan. Because if I was doing my job at corner, the ball I was never having to make any tackles.
The only thing I used to hate was when, like, I play on ball at times, and then you would just get your knees taken out all day. They would just cut you forever, and it just sucks. I hate going against cut blocks consistently. It's not fun, but otherwise, they just departmentalize it, man.
By the way,
Bradley Shaw,
not Brian Shaw.
Yes, it would have been. His name would have been way better if it was Brian Shaw, personally. But,
Agree. All right, let's move on. Nice attempt to suck up there, Ryan. I dig it.
Rob Osgood said, I saw news on the board of another safety recruits from North Carolina. Yes, that's Malcolm Ziegler. Being from North Carolina, I love the fact they are focused down here. Your thoughts on the new offer at a needed position? Thank you. Rob, me and Brian actually were talking about this a little bit earlier before the podcast even started on the phone. I really like the offer a lot. Malcolm is a 6'2", 185-pound safety that I think projects very favorably to a free safety role in a traditional sense, but in Notre Dame's system, that's the boundary safety that's going to rotate to the middle of the field a ton. He's a very athletic kid, springy athlete and explosive, and he's got really good ball skills, man. Yeah. I mean, he's had, I think, like 10 or 12 interceptions in his career, some number like that. Like, he's a really talented cover player. And I mean, he's willing to hit you over the middle of the field. There was a couple nice sticks on some balls over the middle of the field too. So I think there's upside there, man. He plays a lot of corner for his high school. He plays a lot of like cover 3 corner, but he's got good instincts. I think he's got really good ball skills and he can move. So I liked it a lot, actually.
He's very raw technically. He's just out there playing. He's just out there just playing ball. He's not, I mean, fundamentals need a ton of work, but you know my stance on that, Ryan. I've made that very clear over the years. I do not care, especially with this secondary, because between Mickens at corner and O'Leary at safety, I think they can both coach.
Yes.
Mickens is much more proven and a better coach than O'Leary, but O'Leary is a good safeties coach, in my opinion, for what we've seen. But he's exactly the kind of kid that you want to take a flyer on to me. I'm actually surprised they haven't offered him sooner, to be completely honest with you. I think there's some background stuff they needed to get through.
Yeah.
That I would get into it another time, but it was something that happened that wasn't his fault that you need to at least do your homework on, right? Sure. And I think they did it because they went down and saw him a week or two ago.
Multiple times.
They went and visited him didn't see him. They went to his high school.
Yeah,
I should say. But I like it. I mean, this is what we're talking about, though, Ryan. This is the kind of was it somebody on the message board said this yesterday? And it was a really good point, and that I concur with. He said, "I'll say this about this staff: when they miss on guys, when they take flyers on guys that are long and fast."
Yes,
and that's a great observation because you're going to those guys, if they hit, could end up being difference makers. Where some of the like Drew White that's a good, solid football player that doesn't get enough appreciation from some Notre Dame fans, but also was a guy that was limited when you played the better teams in your schedule. We can say both of these things. We can say that's not really the guy you wanted to go beat Alabama without then trashing him like he was some bum football player. He's a good football player. That's why he got signed by an NFL team, but he just wasn't a guy that you're going to go beat Bama with. But those guys are always going to be a little limited. I want the guys that are going to go out there and say, if he hits, he's a Jeremiah Wusu 3-star to star player type of thing. And that's what this kid is. His kid can end up never being anything other than a borderline rotation player for Notre Dame. That can happen. But he's also the kind of kid, boy, if this kid hits, man. And that's the thing about DeJuan Lane. DeJuan Lane's got a little bit of rawness to him, but if he pans out, boy, he is a dude.
Yes.
He's an absolute dude. And I love guys like that.
Well, I wanted to do a piece, Brian, just on like some of the track times of some of the
Yeah,
targets on the board. It's like
yeah.
crazy, man.
Like official track times, not like
yeah,
stated one.
yes,
Yeah. Like
yes,
this kid, what,
exactly.
10.76, I think I saw recently?
10.76, and
That's pretty
then
good.
I mean, yeah, and then I mean, Micah Bell obviously was in, a 10.41 kid. I mean, you're talking about the walk-on safety that's coming to Notre
Yeah.
Dame in 2023 that just runs 10.76 as well. Like Notre Dame's got some
Yeah.
track kids coming this year, man.
I want to say this. I want to respond to a couple things here real quick. Some slander going on in in
Uh-oh.
the chat. Beefeater said, Brian, please tell me you weren't one of those QBs who would fake an injury when he threw an interception. Heck no. Because to me, you had if you intercepted me, I wanted to hit you hard. And then down here from Bill, hold on, no, it wasn't Bill Walsh. I think it was Tommy Guns. Really, hold on a second. Where was it? He said, wouldn't catch Brian doing Oklahoma drill and dang sure not doing bull in the ring. I absolutely did those drills. There's a difference between not liking contact and not wanting contact.
Yeah.
I was a quarterback and a cornerback, meaning if contact was happening, something went wrong. Correct? Means I was getting sacked, I was getting hit, I was getting tackled, things I don't want to happen because that means I didn't. If I'm not running into the end zone or throwing the ball into the end zone, then the play was not a success, right? And so that was bad. If I was a corner and I had to tackle somebody, it's because he caught a pass on me. It means I didn't do my job. I had no problem with contact. I just was like, I grew up with the positions I played saying if I was going to have contact, it was going to be contact I wanted to initiate as a runner. So I mean, I ran over a few people in my day in practice and stuff like that. But when you get to games, it's like, well, if I'm getting tackled, it's a bad thing. If I'm having to tackle somebody, it means I didn't do my job. But I actually rather enjoyed Oklahoma drill, especially when I could carry the ball.
Bull in the ring's illegal in New Jersey now. I don't know if that's illegal. Bull in
It
the ring,
it
that's
should be
illegal
illegal.
everywhere. I
It
think it's
should
illegal
be
everywhere
illegal.
now. Yeah.
It's not something you should do. I thought bull in the ring was stupid.
It is
Oklahoma
stupid.
drill to me is I have no problem with Oklahoma drill. So on that one, no, but like I did not like being on Oklahoma drill on defense though. I always felt that was more of an offensive drill. But I like getting the ball. Say, hey, coach, let me carry the ball. Let me carry the ball back here. You get in that and then deliver some punishment.
Apparently, you brought me to IB to bring some toughness onto the staff. Someone said that. I didn't say that. So,
troll hunter.
Yes.
Yeah, you had to read it out. You had to read it out loud, didn't you, though, Ryan? You had to read it out loud, didn't you?
I didn't read the next one he said, which was very disrespectful to you, sir.
It's all good. It's all good. Hey, it doesn't. Hey, if I was running over 5-year-olds, it's because I was 5 years old too, man. I mean, I'm just saying, come on now, give me some love there, buddy. Give me some love. All right, let's get down up here to some more questions here, Ryan.
Next question is from Matt McCarthy, who says, when talking last week about plays in Notre Dame history you could change, how about Chris Brown's fumble against Clemson in 2015? Would have been 1st and goal at the 2-yard line, and they'd likely score a touchdown and win.
Oh, boy. Possibly. I'm trying to remember what was the score at that point in time.
I was trying to relive it in my head. I was about to look it up.
Yeah, let me because ESPN does a nice job with this. So let's go Notre Dame Clemson box score 2015 because you can see the result of each one. Didn't they have 2 fumbles in that game? I'm trying to feel like they had I know that they had like the fumbled kick return.
That's what I was going to say. They fumbled on a special teams play.
That ended up was about to be the backbreaker because it was 21-3. Let's see. Yeah, it was 21-3. Clemson scored first drive of the 3rd quarter, make it 21-3. Notre Dame fumbled on the kick on the first play from scrimmage, and CJ Prosise and Clemson goes down and they try to throw a kind of a back-breaking play into the end zone. And actually, no, hold on. Which is I'm trying to remember when was it? See, it was I'm trying to remember when it was, but it was they threw an interception and Cole Luke picked it off in the end zone. So, man, where was that play? I can't find it, but anyway. There was a couple times where things happen and you're like, boy, you got a chance to do that. But they ended up getting that fumble and lost that fumble, and then they fumbled a return. So it was a hot mess. No, it's actually no. It was the first drive of the second half. C.J. Sanders fumbled. They went down and scored to make it 21-3, and then C.J. Prosise fumbled the first play, the very next drive. That's how it went down. So they did score after the kickoff,
Gotcha.
and then they held them on the other one. But they were about to put that game away, and then they had a shanked punt, and then Cole Luke ends up picking them off in the end zone. So Clemson had plenty of chances to blow that game out, and they didn't, and Notre Dame came back. But the fumble, Ryan, it was 24-16, and he fumbled with 2 minutes left in the game.
Ugh.
That would have, let's say they get it and go for 2 and don't get it. It's 24-22. They forced a 3 and out. So if you're going down there that next time with the ball, you only need a field goal to win it. And Justin Unit already nailed a 48-yarder in the rain in that point in time. So
would have been a big play. Would have been a big play then. Yeah.
Yeah. That would have been a big play because now you have a chance to win in regulation with your next drive. The question would have been, but then now Clemson goes into we got to score mode on their next possession. What happens there? Do they go down and score or not? Because Clemson had kind of turned the switch off.
Yeah.
And it's hard to turn that switch back on and when you've turned it off, Ryan. When you've got a 21-3 lead and you throw that pick and you're like, hey, you know what? We're just gonna run this sucker out and just get out of here. And it's hard to turn that switch back on. It really is.
It is.
And so I would have felt good about it. I would have felt really good about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Matt, that was a good little memory lane.
I had to kind of re-jog my memory a little bit on that one. Yeah. The one that gets me, though, I've always said is I'd be very curious how that 2014 season would have ended had they not choked that game away against Northwestern. Because remember, they only had one loss at the time. Northwestern was terrible coming into that game. And they had so many dumb plays. You had the going for 2 when kicking the extra point would have made it a 2-touchdown game instead of a 11-point game where a 2-point conversion and a field goal could tie it. Remember that? They scored to go up 11, 40-29. And instead of kicking the extra point to make it a 12-point game, they went for 2 to try to make it a 13-point game, which is dumb.
Yeah.
Because now by getting the extra point, Northwestern needed a touchdown and a 2-point conversion and a field goal to tie it. Whereas if you go up 12, they need 2 touchdowns.
2 scores, yeah.
To beat you. It was a terrible call. And then they ran a jet sweep in that game to Chris Brown. Is the first time they ever handed him the ball in a jet sweep inside the 5-yard line, and he fumbles it. Like they just had so much. So then the next week you barely lose to Louisville. So if you win that game, I think you beat Louisville the next week, and then you get blown out at USC because you're injured. You still finish the year like 10-2, 9-3, and you're feeling a whole lot different about that season than we did when they just completely, utterly collapsed down the stretch of that season and just lost to Northwestern, and they lost to USC, they lost to Louisville, and it was just a train wreck, an absolute train wreck.
Don't miss those days. Yeah. Do not miss those days.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Next question from Matt McCarthy again. Back to back, I think just happened. How would you rank the following safeties that are on the board? Jalen McClain, Marquise Gallegos, DeJuan Lane, Davis Andrews, and Malcolm Ziegler. Do you think Lane could grow into a linebacker? Could he grow to a line? I mean, he could play size-wise.
Look,
if you wanted him to.
Look, DeJuan Lane could get up to 240 pounds if he wanted to. It's just, why would you want to get him up to that? I don't know if he's the kind of guy that you want to blow up into a linebacker. I don't think that's his game.
There's no need to do it. No need to do it.
I don't think that's his game. I think
there's
he's
a couple
a guy
other
that I want.
Safeties that I say, maybe, but that.
I mean, I don't know about you, Ryan. I want him playing center field. I mean, that's where I want him.
Yeah.
I want him using that 6'3", long, rangy. Now, look, your safeties are all going to have to play in the alleys at times. But when I go to single high, I want him to be the guy rolling to single high. That's where I want him to be. I don't want him on the second level when the ball snapped, unless you're going to blitz him.
Yeah.
As a safety. And I don't have a problem with safety blitzes. I just have a problem with the double safety blitzes that they did and then bringing the safeties from the third level.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, you definitely got to time it up a little better than just bringing guys from depth like that. Ranking those, I mean, for me personally, I would go Jalen McClain, DeJuan Lane, Davis Andrews, Malcolm Ziegler, and Marquise Gallegos would be my list.
Grade now.
Yes.
If we were going to do upside grade, I would go Lane, Andrews, and Ziegler would be really close, and then McLean would be my upside grade.
It's fair.
But current grade, Ryan, we're on 100% same page.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Let's go to the next one.
Rob Osgood, in my opinion, for this year is just like every other year. Just win, beat Ohio State, so the stigma is lifted, and that will get recruits' attention.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, Rob. I mean, that's kind of what we're getting to, though, right? Like, that's the whole point of it. Like, you've got to have some sort of on-field results that show that you're that team, right? Not just talking about it. Hey,
yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Ryan, it gets down to the point where everybody talks about wanting to win. You got to prove that you can do it. And, but I say it can't just be beat Ohio State either. I mean, you can't beat Ohio State and then lose 3 of your next 5 games and expect that Ohio State game to matter.
Yes.
Right? The Ohio State game has to be followed because, look, Purdue beat Ohio State. Iowa beat Ohio State with Urban Meyer there. Did that springboard them into national championship status? No, it didn't. Because those teams didn't build on that. They weren't able to continue that into that next level of as a program.
Right.
And like Ole Miss beat Alabama 2 years in a row. They never became national title contender.
Jevin Sneed, baby. Sneed.
Was Jevin Sneed the quarterback? I know Bo Wallace was the quarterback on one.
I think Jevin Sneed was on one, I think. Yeah, I think Bo was the other one, I believe.
I'm gonna look that up because when they beat him in, was it 13 and 14? Was that
something like that?
No, it was 15 and 6. I'm trying to remember when Ole Miss beat Alabama.
Did Jevin Sneed not beat that then? I thought he did.
I know for a fact Bo Wallace was one of them.
I remember Bo Wallace was. He played outside of his mind for that game.
Yeah, I do know Bo Wallace was one of them. Let's see here. So they beat him in 2014. Ole Miss beat him.
Okay.
And that was 23-17. And the quarterback for Ole Miss was Bo Wallace.
Oh.
And then they beat him again in 2015. And the quarterback for that game was Chad Kelly.
Oh, so I'm wrong.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was
Chad
those
Kelly.
Are the 2 guys. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
He's still kicking around in the NFL somehow, man. So
that was one of the best games he ever played. Talk about a guy with tons of talent and just not
that
the
kid
right head space.
That kid had a rifle for an arm.
Oh,
man.
my gosh. He was athletic.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a ton of talent.
Yes. And somehow he's less in the NFL, though, even with his head. So
I know.
Crazy.
It's wild. Here's an interesting one, Ryan.
From Cameron Crazy 818. Turning back the clock a few years, why didn't Notre Dame land Peter Skoronski? Did Jeff Quinn not do a good job, or did he not want him?
They didn't prioritize him. They got on him late, and they were trying to go after some other guys earlier. So they just had some other guys higher on their board, and they tried to turn the heat up on him when it was a little too late. And they had already gotten Notre Dame had kind of already gotten or Northwestern already kind of gotten on him. Because if you remember, that was the 2020 year. Notre Dame got Tosh Baker kind of early. Right. And then I'm going to pull up the offers here because it was an interesting situation. And it's one of those ones where I didn't agree with it, but I also didn't kill him for it at the time either. So you got to be consistent. But
I understand the Skoronski stuff. Yeah, though, honestly, I do.
That 2020 year, they were going after like Andrew Gentry. They were going after Paris Johnson. They were going after some pretty highly ranked guys. But I got to take Bryn Tucker, if you remember him. But I got to tell you, Ryan, they made a lot of evaluation mistakes that year because they could have had, here's some guy, Jimmy Christ was another guy they were trying to get in that class. But here's some guys that they turned down that they could have landed in that class. Peter Skoronski, Zach Zinter are 2 guys, obviously, at the top. And then Roger Rosengarten is a guy that they got on late as well. Oof. Yeah. And that's another one that they could have had a shot at. But yeah, Zach Zinter really wanted to come to Notre Dame. And could
you imagine if last year's offensive line, if the 2022 offensive line for Notre Dame was some semblance of Blake Fisher, Joe Alt, Peter Skoronski, Zach Zinter,
and Jarrett Patterson.
And Jared Patterson
at center.
He stays at center. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Blake moves in at guard, or
Yeah.
you move Skoronski in at guard. Like, who cares? Okay.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. What would the 2021 team have, dude? If that's your offensive line in 2021, Notre Dame's undefeated in the playoff. I don't care how bad of a coach Jeff Quinn was,
Yeah, sure.
because
Yeah.
instead of Kane Madden being at guard, you probably have
Maybe
Josh Lugg at
Skoronski.
guard and Skoronski at tackle.
Yeah, true.
Right?
Yeah. And Skoronski was one of those kids that just came into Northwestern and just knew how to play.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like a,
He'd have been your starting left tackle to begin 2021.
Yep.
And, Blake probably is at right tackle.
Yep.
I mean, it's just.
And if Blake gets hurt, then Joel comes in, and then Blake's probably a guard right now for starting. Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, man, that would be fascinating.
And Zach Zinner's a really good player too for Michigan.
The thing for me though, Ryan, is the reason I'm not going to look back and crush him for it is because what I don't like is when people go back and criticize a staff for not landing a guy that you didn't criticize them for not landing at the time.
Sure.
Right? Because like if I'm like, hey, look, this guy is really good. I knew he was really like, I will till the day that I die hammer Notre Dame for not going after Luke Kuechly. Do you know why? Because I hammered him in 2009 when they decided not to go after Luke Kuechly. But if you didn't like a guy coming out of high school and they didn't like a guy coming to high school, and then you want to look back and, oh, you guys did a terrible. Well, so did you. So I can't stand that. So I try to be consistent with that. So if I liked a guy and they didn't, then I have no problem looking back and saying it was a mistake. But I didn't think Zach Zinter was going to become what he became. And I'd have taken him, but I didn't hammer him for not taking him. I understood it because there were some other guys they were trying to get. My concern was you just didn't land the guys you were trying to get. That was the bigger issue. You failed to land those guys. I thought that Tosh Baker was going to be really good coming out of high school. So I can't hammer you
talented.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was a better prospect than Roger Rosengarten, so I'm not going to crush you for taking Tosh over him. I mean,
I forgot you said Roger Rosengarten too.
Yeah.
Oh man, he's good.
He wasn't a better prospect than Tosh Baker coming out.
Sure.
I mean, and that's the thing is like just that hindsight 2020 stuff is just not what I want to do. And so if I didn't think it was a bad decision at the time, I'm not going to crush you for it moving backwards. And I thought they made a mistake with Peter Skoronski, but it wasn't like I thought it was the mistake that it turned out to be.
Like that egregious.
Yeah, right? I didn't see him being like this future first round pick and oh my goodness, how could you do that?
Multi-year All-American.
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that kind of mistake. So I'm not going to retroactively beat up Jeff Quinn for it. The problem was whatever your strategy was, you executed it poorly because you only landed 2 linemen.
Sure.
That was my issue, more so than particular players that you passed on. Like I had an issue with Jimmy Chris, the way they handled that recruitment. He commits to Virginia, they back off, and the kid eventually flips to Penn State. Well, why didn't you stay on him? Jimmy Chris didn't pan out, but it still was a bad recruiting strategy because maybe he'd have panned out at Notre Dame. Who knows? And that's kind of where I'm at with all that stuff.
Now I'm just imagining an offensive line that also includes Roger Rosengarten, just trying to make that fit.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter Skoronski to center, I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Let's not get carried away. They still would have been coached by Jeff Quinn for most of their careers. So,
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Blake Fisher played some center in high school, right? So just throw him in there.
No. All right. Here's another one from Cameron Crazies.
Cameron said, let's say Kenny Minchie isn't ready to go in 2024 and the staff wants to bring in a grad transfer quarterback. If Dante Moore doesn't win, just a transfer quarterback, not grad. If Dante Moore doesn't win the UCLA job and hits the portal and wants to come to Notre Dame, would the staff take him?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, just the way that whole thing went down, I think the bridge has been burned for Dante to be the quarterback at Notre Dame. Plus, I don't think Notre Dame's going to be looking for a quarterback next year that's going to block CJ Carr.
Right.
If anything, remember yesterday we were talking about the recruiting for transfer portals, right? A lot of it's get a bridge guy.
Yeah.
A guy that comes in for a year or two that bridges you to the next quarterback. And to me, if they decide to go with a quarterback next year, let's say that Angeli and Minchie just don't develop and they're just not ready to be starters, and you don't want to force CJ into starting as a freshman and say, hey, we're going to go out and get a veteran guy that's going to come in and be a bridge guy to Kenny or CJ the next year.
Sure.
That's fine. Totally cool with that. I'm not bringing in a quarterback that's going to make that's going to make him sit for a couple years.
Right.
And here's the other thing is if Dante doesn't win the starting job at UCLA with the quarterbacks he's going against, then he's just not as good as we thought he was going to be. So now if the better way to phrase it for me would be if Dante goes out there and balls out, but he just doesn't like being as far away from home and wants to come back into the Midwest, would you look at him? I think that would be more of a I'd have to at least think about it, but I'd still say no, and I think the staff would say no. Just the way that the whole thing went down, in my opinion.
I don't think Dante would be open to that either, to be honest. So
because he was upset about how it all went down, and it's whatever.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
But his thing is that he said he wants to come to Notre Dame. Would staff take him?
Sure.
And I don't think so. I think there was a window for Dante to want to come to Notre Dame. He chose not to. And then when they went in a different direction, he got upset about it. And I just think that bridge was burned in both directions. And it is what it is. But I have zero doubt in my mind. I guess I shouldn't say zero. I have like a 1% doubt in my mind that Dante Moore is not going to be the starting quarterback at UCLA.
I think he's going to be very good as long as he has everything together around him.
Yeah, so, if the mindset is correct. And I feel like he's going to a head coach. He's going to a head coach that to me will be able to tell his dad.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Chip Kelly is anything but yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that could be the biggest thing for Dante is he's got to get someone that becomes the voice in his life that's not his dad. When it comes to his dad can be his voice as a dad, but as far as like directing his future as a football player, I think he's done a very poor job so far.
Yeah.
And he's put his son in some tough situations. But in the end, I think it's going to end up working out because I think Chip Kelly is someone who has a chance to get a lot out of Dante Moore, in my opinion.
Chip's an offensive genius. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Absolutely. So I hope it's going to work out for him, and I hope it worked. I like Dante. My issue is not Dante. My issue is the people around Dante. That was the problem. The problem was never Dante. And now Dante's problem is, bro, it's time to man up, put your big boy pants on, and start making your own decisions, right? Like that was kind of my issue.
Yeah.
But Dante's a good kid, man, and I hope he's going to win. I think he will. I think he will. Look,
seeing him throw in person was just like,
he turned Dorian Thompson-Robinson into a pretty darn good quarterback, and I don't think he is
a draftable football player.
Yeah, so, and that is impressive to me. Yes. Because I don't see it with him. Like big arm, but just, there's a lot of things I don't love about his game. But to your point, he turned him into a pretty good football player this past year.
Yeah.
And Dante's arm talent is way better than Dorian Thompson-Robinson's. I mean, boy. Yeah. And I don't care that Chip Kelly wasn't good in the NFL. You know who else sucked as an NFL head coach? Nick Saban.
Yeah.
Steve Spurrier.
Bobby Petrino.
Right? I don't care. It's a different game. It's a completely different game.
And also, Chip Kelly actually had two really successful seasons with the Eagles. Then he got in his own way there.
Yeah.
That was more about Chip wanting too much control than him not being a good coach.
It was the non-coach. That's a good point. Pete Carroll got fired twice before he came to USC. Let's not forget that either as a head coach. But yeah, you're right, Ryan. He did go. He went 10-6, 10-6, and then 6-9. So
and then he wanted all the personnel control. He's like, I want to be the general manager too. And then it all fell apart after that. But I mean, go look at the couple years that he was there to begin with. LaShawn McCoy's best seasons were there. Yep. Nick Foles one year was like 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Like there was still some good stuff mixed in there, man. There was. He's just he's just egotistical. That's his problem.
Yep. And then Pete Carroll got fired after 1 year with the Jets, and he was 3 years with the Patriots, went 27-21 and got fired after an 8-8 season.
Yep.
So before he came to USC. So yeah, that's completely irrelevant.
Yes, it is.
All right, let's go down here to Mr. Collins.
Michael Collins says, is Davis Andrews planning to go on a Mormon mission? If so, how does that factor into the safeties they take in the class? So, Michael, I did put this on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com like last week or the week before. So it's a potential for Davis Andrews. It's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to go on a mission, but he is Mormon and he is exploring the possibility. So nothing is set in stone. No decision has been made on that side, but it is at least a talking point to him and the schools that he's involved with. So it's possible as far as the Mormon mission goes, but it's not something that's set in stone and that he's 100% sure that he's going to do.
There you go.
Jason Smith says, so if
speaking
Keanu,
of Mormon missions,
yes, speaking of Mormon missions, so if Keanu Kia comes back, does he count as a recruit for this year? Is he still on scholarship, or does he have to come back and show he's still the guy they would bring in?
No, if he comes back, he'll be on scholarship. I mean, that's just how it'll be. He has to, if he has, I mean, it's a very fair, I mean, Jason, this is a very fair question, but he would come back on scholarship, because if they're not going to give him a scholarship, he'll just go to BYU or Utah or something like that and play out west somewhere, because he's a California native, correct?
Yes.
So, he may go to UCLA or Cal or something. He's not going to come to Notre Dame as a walk-on. Now, Notre Dame, there does have to be an evaluation process for Notre Dame about, because you don't have to honor the scholarship. You can say, hey, look, we think it's best that you move on or something like that. But they could make that decision. But I think as of right now, I don't anticipate that being the case.
Yeah,
in my opinion. So, yeah, that's kind of where it's at for that one.
His younger brothers his younger brother's a pretty talented player as well. So yeah.
Yep. He's did you say 25 or 26 kid, Ryan?
25. 25
kid.
Just Kia. Yep.
Yep. All right. This is an interesting one, Ryan.
Adam Blair wants to know who's the better athlete, Jalen Smith or Micah Parsons. He did add in the chat also pre-injury.
Pre-injury.
Yes.
I think it's Jalen Smith. It's not by a lot, but I think it's Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith is the most explosive linebacker I've ever seen before the injury. If we're talking about in college, because that's the only thing you can compare him to is where they were in college. Micah Parsons continued to get older and more explosive and better in the NFL. But if you look at where they were through 3 years of college, prior to the injury, Jalen Smith was a more explosive player.
I think it's Micah Parsons.
There's no doubt. I don't think it's Micah Parsons. Not in college.
Not even close? I mean, he went to his pro day and ran a 4.39. So,
that's fast. But, I mean, talking about better athlete.
I mean, he literally could play defensive end, inside linebacker, outside linebacker. I mean, that's
fine. Jalen Smith was allowed to. I'm not saying he's a bum, Ryan. I'm just saying I think.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that's pretty athletic.
I never said he wasn't athletic. He's very athletic. But I think Jalen Smith was more athletic. That's my opinion. You think it's Micah Parsons. That's fair, but I don't think it's close. I think Jalen Smith, to me, would have put up stupid numbers to combine, like Micah Parsons did. But I think he was a better athlete. I just think the problem was Jalen wasn't allowed to show it the way that he could have. Because to your point, here's what did Penn State do with Micah Parsons in college?
Played him everywhere
and let him attack, right? Jalen wasn't allowed to do that. I remember about the only time I ever remember Jalen coming off the edge was a game against Texas in 15, and he sacked the quarterback. So never saw it again. Like, what are we doing here? But for me, it's not close. I think Jalen Smith is. Well, I say not close, meaning it's clear. It's clear. It's not that Jalen would have run a 4.28, and so it's not close. I'm saying in the process for me, it's clear. That's probably a better way of saying it than not close. But I think it's very clear to me. Now, college is one thing. Pro, I mean, we won't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's
I just think it also speaks to Jalen's athleticism that he was able to have the injury he had and still come back and be a solid NFL linebacker for a few years.
Yeah.
So could you imagine this, Ryan? How about this one? Take away that disagreement, because we definitely don't agree on that. But here's something I think will be fun to think about. What would have the Dallas Cowboys linebacker room look like if because they had Micah Parsons and Jalen Smith on the team for a year, correct?
Yeah.
What would that have looked like if they had that duo and Jalen never got hurt?
Right. And what's Leighton Vander Esch too. So yeah, it's a lot of size and athleticism is what that is. I mean, it'd be a great conversation of like where you would play everyone. I'm like, I guess I would play Micah Parsons as a Sam and then put him on the line of scrimmage a ton and do all. Yeah. I mean, it would have been interesting.
How do you fit that trio together though? Or would it have changed their drafting strategy if they got Jalen and he wasn't hurt?
It would have changed their drafting strategy. I don't think you draft a linebacker at 12 if you have a healthy Leighton Vander Esch and a healthy Jalen Smith, right? Like I just don't know because I mean I would say this: Micah Parsons coming out of Penn State, you thought he could play defense like edge and rush the
Mhm.
passer, but you didn't think he'd be what he is now as far as
Yeah.
like 13 sacks in a season. Like I still
Right.
thought he was a middle linebacker that could play some on ball, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think you do the 12th overall pick at linebacker if you already had 2 linebackers to that
You
level.
want to hear something crazy?
What's that?
For about 3 or 4 months, Micah Parsons was in the Notre Dame commits chat in his class.
That's crazy.
He was actually with the class ahead of him because he was what, 2018 class, I think.
Sounds right.
Let me look. Yeah, he was 2018.
Yeah.
So he was in the chat with the 2017 kids for like 3-4 months. Very early in his recruitment, he wanted to go to Notre Dame badly.
Interesting.
But that was never going to happen. There was way too much going on there that Notre Dame just couldn't mess with. But he wanted to come to Notre Dame. And I remember talking to, because I knew that because a lot of the commits that I knew, this is back when I covered recruiting, a lot of the commits that I knew were like, yeah, Micah Parsons has been in our group text for a while. He really wants to come to Notre Dame. It just, there was nothing the staff could have done about that either, Ryan. This isn't like they screwed up or something like that. There was no way they're going to get that kid to Notre Dame.
I remember seeing his highlight tape where he's playing running back at his size. It was insane, man. Absolutely insane.
Yeah. That would have been because he'd have been a freshman in 2018. So in 2019 and 2020, you'd have had him and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the same linebacking core.
Imagine him on like the 2012 team when you were still running a 3-4. Like,
him and Manti.
My Lord.
You'd had. Well, where would you have played him on that team? Would you have had him as the edge, or would you have had him inside next to Manti?
I would have put him on the edge, yeah. I would have put him on the edge, and then like on sub, I would have just dropped him back to linebacker.
Here's why I would have put him inside a linebacker. Because when I look at the makeup of the rest of that lineup, I'd rather knowing what I know now about him, I don't care much for him. But at the time, Prince Shimbo was pretty good as that edge rusher. He was a better player than Dan Fox and Carlo Calabrese. So it would have been like, how do I get the best 3 on the field together? Would have been the conversation. Knowing what I know now about Prince Shimbo as a human being, I'm with you. Put him as the edge rusher, and we'll go about it that way. Yeah. But boy, that'd have been fun.
Jason Rose just said Micah Parsons, Jock, and Kyle on that 2020 defense. Jason, but Micah Parsons opted out, so you wouldn't have been able to see that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
2019, you would have saw it. But.
Yeah, but it is interesting. But would he have opted out if he was at Notre Dame? Because remember, the Big Ten kind of canceled the season for a minute there, and some of those kids opted out. And then when they decided to play again, some of them just stayed out. Didn't Ohio State have a kid that was like that he opted out and stayed out, and then another one decided to come back?
I don't remember about Ohio State. I remember the major guys that year were Rashawn Slater opted out of Northwestern, Jamar Chase opted out, Penny Sewell opted out at Oregon. Yeah.
The Big Ten ones were weird because the kids opted out when the Big Ten had said we're not playing. So that would have been interesting. Very interesting.
Yep.
All right. Here we go.
Next question is from Florida Irishman. It says, hypothetically speaking, if the transfer rules were the same as 5 to 10 years ago, who would be on Notre Dame's roster if non-graduate transfers had to sit out a year?
Well, I think, Ryan, they would still have the same transfers in, don't you think? Because they're all grad transfers. Who am I thinking? I think they're all grad transfers, right? They're all graduated.
They are.
I know Antonio Carter.
It wouldn't affect Notre Dame at all, really.
Now, where it would affect it is guys going out.
Right.
Logan Diggs isn't leaving if he has to sit out a year.
Because he's only a third-year player. Right?
Tyler Buckner probably stays. Lorenzo Styles leaves no matter what. He'd have gone and sat out redshirted at Ohio State and played, which is what he's planning on doing anyway.
Yeah.
I think he still would have left. I think Prince Colley still would have left. I think he would have get it because he didn't redshirt in 19 or 21. I don't believe. Didn't he play a bunch of games on special teams in 21? Prince Colley
He may have. Yeah.
So I think he probably still would have left and stayed. I think Matt McCarthy said this. I think Drew Pine probably stays. At least one of those 2 quarterbacks stays, in my opinion. But a lot of the guys that left, I don't think for Notre Dame would look a ton different. I think the biggest one would be Logan Diggs. I think that's the big one.
Did Drew Pine end up getting his degree or no? I know that's been like a back and forth. I'm not sure. I'm not sure either.
I don't know. That's a good question because He would have been, so Drew Pine was in the 20 class, so he was an early enrollee. So he had that spring in 20, all of 20, all of 21, and then the fall. He might have been able to get it in 3. I mean, that'd have been 3
Possible.
years of college plus
Yeah.
summer, right? Because you had the spring and then a fall and then 2 full years. He's at
Yeah.
least close.
Yeah.
I would imagine he's at least close. I'd be curious about that one. But yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So I'm not quite sure of that answer. But yeah, I don't think it would look a whole lot different for Notre Dame, honestly.
Yeah.
I think
not a ton.
maybe some of the guys maybe wouldn't have gone in the portal. I don't know. But all the kids they got were graduates. So I think the only thing I would say, Ryan, is 5-10 years ago, kids transferring just wasn't as big of a thing, period.
Yes. Definitely not the volume.
Yeah. But for Notre Dame, I think the incoming would have looked very similar. Very similar.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I think the impact would have been moving out would be a lot different. I don't know. I hope they fix the rule. I hate it. I really do hate it.
From Zach Filippi. If I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize very much. What happened earlier in the season that the leadership was poor, and how did it get turned around?
We've talked about this a little bit, Zach, and there's some things we're just not going to share. But let's just say this. I'm comfortable saying this, Ryan. There were some, and look, this isn't just coming from us. Michael Mayer made comments that alluded to this as well early in the season. But there were, let's just say there were some veteran players who weren't bought into the way things were being done. And they were kind of wanting to do their own thing. They didn't show the respect to the position coaches that I think they probably should have, and set bad examples in some ways. I mean, not terrible. It wasn't like, but there was some stuff going on that was just not ideal. And in some instances with kids who had really bad attitudes, and, as I know one particular player that kind of went off on the coach in front of all the players in practice or in a meeting. I forget where it was, but you couldn't bench the kid because you didn't have anybody else. I mean, your numbers were so limited. There's nothing you could do. That's going to create a really toxic environment. And I think over time, you started to see some of those guys just kind of, Marcus Freeman stepped in and dealt with some of that. Like, hey, this is going to end. If you want to stay here, this is going to end now.
Yeah.
And some of the leadership stepped in and did some things. And then, of course, they started winning. And it's a lot, because part of it too, Ryan, is if they don't lose to Marshall, some of that doesn't become as big of an issue.
It's different. Yeah.
Because their attitudes got crappier after that loss. Because I'm just doing my thing for me now because we're not playing for you. You beat Marshall and you're like, okay, yeah, the Ohio State game lost, but we got a whole season in front of us. We got USC, we got Clemson coming up. But I think that factored into it as well. And you had some older guys that were just like, I'm going to do me. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it got fixed by Marcus Freeman basically saying you either fix it or you're not going to be here. And the reality is, for a veteran player, getting kicked off the team is almost like draft suicide for a guy,
right.
And I think some of those guys paid the price anyway, because look, here's the deal. People are going to find this stuff out, whether the coach tells them what the problem was or not. People are going to find out, whether it's talking to your teammates, whether it's this, Ryan, how much these guys put into learning about you could argue the NFL doesn't make enough smart decisions when they do learn the stuff about guys' backgrounds.
Sure.
But they learn all this. I mean, they learn all this stuff. So if you were a head case and a bad attitude in practice, they're going to know. Why do you think Alizé Mack fell to round 7? It wasn't because he doesn't have ability. It's not that he would have been a second round pick, but he fell to 7 because of attitude problems.
Yeah.
And certain guys this year for Notre Dame, part of the issue they had about not getting drafted is maybe they don't get drafted anyway. But when you learn some of the stuff, they're definitely not getting drafted. And so I think there was some of that going on as well. And that's why I said sometimes it's an addition by subtraction. It doesn't mean that those guys aren't talented players, but it's not just about talent. You made this point yesterday, Ryan, about Sam Hartman. It's not just about the talent. It's also, do you fit into the culture? Is the culture healthy? Yep. Culture is important in football. And if you don't have a healthy culture, you're not going to maximize your ability. And we heard Bama guys talking about this. Who was the lineman that said that we got too many guys worried about NIL right now? Was it after the Tennessee loss or the LSU loss?
It was the tennis.
So it was after their was it the point is they were not playing to their ability, and he called his teammates out for it. Got too many guys worried about NIL right now.
Yep.
And so Notre Dame wasn't alone on this. And I think part of it was, I'll just say this, there were some guys that didn't have the option of coming back to Notre Dame this year, even if they wanted it.
Yeah.
And that's how Marcus Freeman addressed it. And I think people took notice.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the team started playing better.
Agree.
So, yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
Little more buy-in after that is how I would put it.
Yes. Well, because now they know there's consequences if you don't buy in.
Yep. And there needs to be consequences. Like it's just, there needs to be consequences always. Yep. I've learned that over my many years on this earth.
Agree. Here's an interesting question from David Lowe.
David Lowe says, do you all believe if we had secured Andy Ludwig as offensive coordinator, it would have any effect on our preseason ranking? Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it comes into it. I mean, definitely. I mean, David, because I think that the one thing, well, not one thing, but a major thing that people have question marks with from a national perspective is Jared Parker. How good of an offensive coordinator is he? And and from a national level, from a Notre Dame level, as far as fans and from media perspective, it's a fair question. Like we don't 100% know what the outcome is going to be. Andy Ludwig is a much more known commodity. He's a guy that you look at and say, I know what he's going to bring to the table. He's been doing it here, and here for years and years and years. So if he was the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame right now, I think that people would have a higher perception of Notre Dame offensively. They'd be like, yeah, man, it's going to roll. Him with Sam Hartman and the young wide receivers and Aldrich Estime and the offensive lineman. And so I think that it does affect the perception. I do.
Now, would there have been some national people that would have talked down Andy Ludwig? Sure. But the major consensus from all the reputable people would have been, this is a really good hire from Notre Dame. You get Andy Ludwig and Sam Hartman, that's quite the combination.
Yes,
How would have it impacted their ranking, Ryan? Probably, I mean, instead of 13, they'd be 9. Instead of the people that have them 9, they may put them 6 or 7. You know, hey, the offense is going to be really good, and we know the defense is usually pretty good. So, but I mean, some people still would have found ways to be critical of Notre Dame.
Always.
So,
yep.
Yeah. But most people, I think, absolutely. I think Ryan nailed it. I'm very optimistic about what he's going to do, Ryan, Jared Parker. But it's a guess. It's a projection. I don't know.
It is.
You know, if I were to sit there saying, I know for a fact that Jared Parker is going to be good next year, Ryan would have this look on his face like, okay, how do I tell my boss he's a moron without telling him he's being a moron? You know?
I wouldn't call you a moron. I would just say you're being a little dishonest. All. So
a little
dishonest. I mean, you might believe it. I don't know. People believe things.
It could just it's Ryan, or it's a homer take. Like, dude, you're giving me fanboy takes right now. Like that's what you're doing. It's total homer stuff. And that's now. Do I think he's got a shot to be it? Am I optimistic about it? Yes. Will I be surprised if he's successful? Not really. I can't tell you for sure. I don't think Jared Parker could tell you that for sure. Right? I mean, because how many games has he called at Notre Dame? 0.
Yeah.
You know, so we'll see. I hope he's good. Here's an interesting one, Ryan. I found this a really interesting question from ND Estimate Trucking LLC.
And ND Estimate Trucking LLC says, who was Gunnar Kyle, Phil Dracovic, or Dane Christ? Who was your higher rated recruit out of high school? And which one would you choose to lead the current Notre Dame team offense and why?
And then who was the better QB? He had said.
So
to me, Gunnar Kiel was by far the third guy on that list for me. I did not view Gunnar Kiel as a 5-star quarterback. I thought he was a top 100 guy for sure, but I did not think he was a 5-star quarterback. And I think that had he not committed to LSU first, that he would not have been if he was committed to Notre Dame right away, I don't think he's a 5-star quarterback. Phil Dracovic I had as a 5-star quarterback. Dane Christ I had as a 5-star quarterback. Dane Christ actually was in the first full class I ever evaluated and ranked. He had a huge arm.
Yeah.
Looking back, I probably would have had him as a 4.5-star recruit now because there were long delivery, not super accurate ball placement. But even then, you go watch him at the Army All-American practices, and him and Michael Floyd were just killing people that year. I mean, people forget Michael Floyd went off in the Army game. His quarterback was Dane Christ. He was one throwing him all those throws. Did I ever tell you a story about how Patrick Peterson pretty much just how he avoided Michael Floyd in the game? Did I ever tell you that story? That's a great story. I mean, that's how just dominant he was all week. And that was still the greatest receiver high school class I've ever seen. I mean, it was phenomenal. But Dane was really talented. He had a huge arm. Phil Dracovic was more of the dual threat guy. He was a really good quarterback. If I could take,
he was nuts out of Pound Richland. Man.
Oh,
he was
man,
nuts.
he was. If I could take anybody to run this team, I mean, I'll tell you what, you know who had the best single season of all three of those guys, though? It was Gunnar Keel.
Yeah.
The year before he had that really bad, or was it the year he had the bad head injury? Because I think
it was the year he had the bad one. I think it happened.
He was really good that year, Ryan.
Threw like 28 touchdowns or something.
Yeah, had over 3,000 yards. Do you remember what year that was? I'm going to look up his numbers real quick.
I don't remember that.
So that would have been, he transferred after 2012. So what did that have been? 14?
Probably.
2014, because he had to sit out a year. So yeah, that year, Ryan, he threw for 3,254 yards, and he had 31 touchdowns, and he had 31 touchdowns and 13 picks. And he in the first game back after that injury, he had 436 yards, but he threw 3 picks, and then after that, he just was never the same. He went for 161, 174, 190, and he was just never the same guy. He really was just never the same guy. He had a couple big games. So like even the next year against Temple, he threw for 427 yards, but he threw 4 picks. Yeah. He just kind of got a little skid. And that was a brutal hit. I mean, that was a brutal hit.
I was surprised he ever played again after that.
Yeah, I don't even blame him for not being the same, dude. Like that's just one of those things where, man, you come back and it's like, bro, that was a really bad hit.
Yes.
But he had the best single season of all those guys. I mean, Phil was pretty good in 2020, but he was still learning and still evolving. It was his first year as a starter. He's playing against a little better level of competition. The COVID stuff had jacked up the offseason. You know, Phil's first year at BC was pretty good. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy after that.
Yeah.
So
I think health, if health is not a attributing factor, I would probably go Phil, but it's not like, I'm not like definitive with it. Yeah. I mean, I thought Dane Christ was going to be really good, so I missed on that one a little bit, but yeah.
Well, and he showed flashes early on. I mean, heck, Ryan. I mean, his you think about they beat Purdue in his first game, and then when you look at the Michigan game in 2010, I mean, Dane had them rolling. They were whooping Michigan when he played, and then he gets knocked out and he misses like a quarter and a half of that game, and then they bring in Nate Montana, then Tom Reese. Eventually, Dane comes back, and what does he do when he comes back? He throws a 95-yard touchdown pass to Kyle Rudolph. You know, and then you look at what he did the next week. They come out against Michigan State. The next week, he throws for 369 yards and 4 touchdowns. He throws for 304 yards against Stanford. Played okay against Boston College. Had a pretty good game against Pitt. Had a couple deep balls. Had 3 touchdown passes and 255 yards against Western Michigan, and then the Navy game happened. And they didn't have Michael Floyd that game. He played really bad. He just looked skittish. And then, of course, the next week, he comes out against Tulsa and gets hurt. And he was never the same dude after that. Just was never the same guy. But to your point, Ryan, I mean, he had 2,000 yards in basically half a season and 15 touchdowns. And in 7 starts, he had 2 games of over 300 yards. I mean, so you saw it. I mean, the bomb he threw against Michigan, you know, to Rudolph, there's not a lot of guys can make that throw from their own end zone. You know, he hit Floyd. Do you remember the touchdown pass he threw to Floyd in the back of the end zone against Michigan State in 2015 2010? So. Go watch the highlights of that game, Ryan. He dropped one like it was like in the back of the end zone, but it was like in the back left middle. So it was like over top. It was crazy. It wasn't even like a corner route. It was a crazy throw. But then he'd throw a Hail Mary against Michigan at the end of the game, and it goes into the stands. Like he just couldn't control it. Do you remember that, Elite?
Yeah.
The Hail Mary. Like, dude, how do you throw a Hail Mary into the stands? Not even out of the end zone. He threw it into the stands, dude. It's like he couldn't control the arm. I mean, that was the problem. He just couldn't control the arm. But man, he had a cannon for an arm. I mean, he had a bazooka. He just couldn't control it. All right, let's get to some more here. Here's a 2-parter from Kevin Carter.
Kevin says, Brian, that Haskins Ohio State team did lose to Purdue, but the next 2 weeks they won in overtime against a 500 Maryland team because their quarterback overthrew a wide open receiver for the 2-point conversion. Then they followed that up having to come back to beat a 2-win Nebraska team. So it wasn't just the Purdue loss, but the 3-game stretch.
No, I think it was the Purdue loss, because here's the thing. If they would have, and I get what you're saying, it's kind of like he's saying a lot like the Notre Dame 2015 season, where it wasn't just the loss to Stanford at the end that knocked him out. It was playing poorly in the 2 games before against BC and Wake Forest. So I understand where you're coming from, Kevin, but here's the deal. If they don't lose to Purdue, they're undefeated. They're 13-0. I also would argue, do they have the same mental letdowns against those teams in 2018 if they don't lose to Purdue? I mean, that's the thing you have to think about as well. Like, where are they mentally if they don't lose to Purdue? Because let's not forget too, yes, they didn't play great against Maryland, but they scored 52 points. So it was like the offense stunk, but they barely beat Nebraska. But they also went on the road and beat Michigan State by 20. The week after the Maryland game, they beat Michigan, who was ranked. Remember at that time, Ryan, there was a lot of analysts saying that if Michigan beat Ohio State, that they should get in over Notre Dame, even though they had a loss and Notre Dame beat them. Do you remember that nonsense that was coming out? Yep. Well, yeah, that was way back in September, like it's a different season, or it's like preseason. And they're a different team now, right? Because Michigan was getting a ton of hype, and Ohio State destroyed them. They beat them 62-39, and they went into the Big Ten championship game and blew out Northwestern 45-24. So they had more than made up for the close losses to Nebraska and Wisconsin or Maryland in those games.
Was that the year Maryland had that crazy performance from Anthony McFarland?
Yes.
Was that in that year?
Yes. Yes. It's exactly the game. No,
it was like
exactly
long run after long run. It was insane, man.
It was nuts. He rushed for 298 yards that game, Ryan.
Insane, man.
That kid had a weird stat line. So here's what he did. He had back-to-back. So against Texas, he had 2 carries for 3 yards.
Yeah.
Went for 8 for 69 against BG. Then he had back-to-back 100-yard games against Temple and Minnesota, 107, 112, and he only carried the ball 11 and 6 times. Here's what he did the next 5 games. He went 9 for 34, 9 for 74, 6 for 15, 16 for 83, 8 for 17. Then they played Indiana on November 10th. He went 29 for 210.
Oof.
Then he played against Ohio State the next week. He went 21 for 298. And then the next game against Penn State, he goes 6 for 12.
Very boomer bust, yes.
Yes. It was so weird. And it was the same way the next year, too. It was just, but he was crazy against Ohio State. It
was insane, man. I remember watching that game. I was just like, what is happening right now? Like, it was just long run after long run.
Oh, man, it was nuts. It was nuts. But the point is, though, Kevin, and your point's fair, but my point is this, though, is if Ohio State wins that game, they have a road win over a ranked Penn State team. They're undefeated. They have a blowout win over a Michigan team that everybody and their mother thought was great. That Northwestern team finished the year ranked in the top 25, and they also beat TCU on the road. And, and that was also the year, remember, Urban got suspended for like the first 3 games, and it was just a weird year. But they're undefeated in 13-0, and there's no way a 13-0 Ohio State team is not getting into the college football playoff over a Oklahoma team that had a loss. No way.
Was Michigan's quarterback Wilton Spate that year?
It was Shea Patterson was the quarterback.
Oh, Shea Patterson was the quarterback. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. But remember, Ryan, that Oklahoma team had a loss to Texas that year. They were 12-1. So you can't tell me that a 12-1 Texas Oklahoma team is getting in over an undefeated Ohio State team that beat Penn State on the road and beat Michigan by 23.
Right.
You just, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. So, but yes, those games were not, but teams are going to have those kind of games. Nobody blows everybody out every game. Do you remember what was the one year that Alabama won it? Was it the 2011 Alabama team or was it the 09 team? When was Lane Kiffin there at Tennessee? It was the 09. It was their first title team. Okay. Remember that game? They beat Tennessee, who was not very good, 12-10. And I think Terrence Cody blocked like 3 kicks that game.
Oh, I remember that game. Yeah.
And that Tennessee team went 7-6. That was a pretty good Alabama team, right? I mean, they went undefeated. And that year,
so bad, man. Because I'm like, how is Terrence Cody blocking kicks? He can't jump. Like, what are we doing right now?
Bully the guy and just they were bad kicks. But you're going to have those games, right? I mean, the 2019 LSU team. Remember how good they were? They beat Auburn like 23-20. They had a bad game. By the way, my favorite Alabama or LSU game that year of the regular season was not the Alabama game where they got up big in Alabama. That Texas game against Sam Ehlinger early in the year was a phenomenal back and forth game.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a much more entertaining game than the Alabama game. Because if you remember, LSU got a big lead on Alabama, and then Alabama chipped away, came back, and then LSU went back and put it away. But that Texas game was incredibly entertaining.
Yep.
All right, let's get down to some more here, Ryan. Here, I'm going to ask this one, Ryan. I want you to answer this one. Andrew Gilmore says, who is the fastest guy on offense in the 2024 class? It's down to two guys, right, Ryan? I mean, it's
I think that Cam probably edges Isaiah Canyon, but I also think that Isaiah Canyon maybe gets faster than him in college with a little bit of because Cam for me is Cam's a little bit advanced from his frame perspective. I don't think Cam's going to get a ton bigger. I mean, he probably play around 200 pounds. Isaiah Canyon could be 215 pretty easily, and when he gets that 15 pounds. There's a possibility that he gets more explosive. So I think Canyon might end up being the fastest of the guys committed right now, but I think it's Cam Williams right now.
So you see Cam as a 4.4 guy right now, right?
Yeah, I think he tied at 4.47 or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's a slight difference.
And when you say 4.47, you're talking about the you'd say that would be your prediction for electronic, and then and Isaiah was 4.51.
4.51. Yeah, so it's by a hair, it's by a step, but I think that Isaiah has guys. Yeah, I think Isaiah has the opportunity to be faster long term, but Cam probably right now, I would say.
I agree with you. I think Cam plays faster too right now.
Cam plays very fast.
He is one of those first step and he's going kind of guys. Yes. Yeah, he's very good. It'll be a conversation. I do think it'll be a debate. I do think it'll be a debate. And I would argue that those two guys are also the two fastest guys in the class, period. Not even just offense
right now. Yeah.
I don't think Leonard I love Leonard Moore. I don't put him quite on the same level of those guys speed wise.
No, he's probably a step 4 or 5 type guy. Yeah,
he's a step behind. He's another guy like Isaiah Kane that I think is going to get a lot faster.
Yes,
but right now
he fills out.
Yeah, he's low to mid 4.5 kind of guy. I agree with you on that.
I mean, with Bodie Cahoon's 4.54 though, man, he's in the conversation at least. He can run, man. He can run.
There's no doubt. When we heard Teddy Rizak we've heard anywhere between 4.48 and 4.52 with him.
Yeah.
I've heard 4.48, 4.52, and 4.55 are the three different times I've heard with him. All of them are moving.
So fast. Got it.
Yeah. It's not like 4.48 and 4.67. Yeah.
He can
like Kyle Hamilton. Remember that you were being told by people around him that he was going to run a 4.3 at the combine.
Yeah. 4.39 or something like that. Okay. Yeah.
No, you misunderstood, Ryan. They were talking about the shuttle. They were talking about the shuttle, not the.
Well, I would not have been excited at all because 4.39 is not a great shuttle.
He was closer to that than the 40 time. Oh my goodness. All right. Here is here's one right here. Let's go to this one.
Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says, hypothetical, Antonio Carter balls out for 1 to 2 years at Notre Dame and becomes a first-round pick at safety. How big is it for safety recruiting to get Hamilton and Carter in round 1?
It's pretty big when you say, Ryan. I mean,
massive. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it would certainly help. I don't think it completely answers all the questions because you had to go to the transfer portal to get that one. But I think it's like the whole thing. Well, you got Harrison Smith and Kyle Hamilton. Yeah, but they were a decade apart.
Right.
So I mean, it's a little bit different, but now all of a sudden you stack a second guy up 3 years after Kyle Hamilton, it helps. And it'd be the same coach as well. Yeah, that would help too.
And if you develop Antonio Carter into that type of player in 1 to 2 years too, Josh, I would say yes, especially because I mean, Antonio Carter's not a first-round pick right now, guys. He's not, based on his Rhode Island film. But if they propelled him into that, then that's massive, man. It's absolutely
because if he was a first-round pick right now, Ryan, he would not be coming to Notre Dame. He'd be going to the NFL, and he would have, maybe being at the FCS level would have dropped him down to round 2. But that's it. If he was a first-round talent right now. Yep. But we'll have that conversation after we actually see him in a Notre Dame uniform.
Yes.
But that's something I'm very curious to see your thoughts on that. And also, we got to see him transition to safety because he's not a high draft pick as a corner. The question is, can he become one as a safety? that would be the discussion.
We first need to answer the question if he can transition to safety or not,
Yeah.
which
Right.
we think he can, but
Right.
haven't seen it yet.
Because it's not, I mean, not every corner can transition to safety,
No.
right? I mean, I think people think like not every right tackle can go to left or vice versa. Most can to a degree, but
yeah,
I have no doubt that he can transfer to safety. The question is, can he be as impactful as a safety? And this is what you're saying as well. He'll be able to place it. He'll be able to move to safety, no problem, and provide depth. The question is, will he be the same level of impact player moving up and then moving over is going to be the question. Here's another, we're getting to some really, really, I mean, they've all been great questions, but these are some really interesting ones.
Jay Henry says, which Notre Dame player's performance could have the biggest impact on recruiting as far as perception?
See, I'm back and forth on this one, Ryan. Like I keep changing my answer in my head. My first answer was Sam Hartman. Like if Sam Hartman comes in and lights it up and is in the Heisman ceremony, that was my first thought, right?
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like, yeah, but I don't know that necessarily changes the perception because it was a transfer guy. It wasn't necessarily a guy that you developed. So I don't know if that answers any of your development questions. My next thought was like Tobias Merriweather. You know,
wide receiver and pass rusher were my.
That was going to be my third. Was like either Riley Mills, like that. Yeah. To me, the one that what I think would have the biggest impact is if Riley Mills comes out and balls out, and just becomes like a Jerry Tillery type season production wise.
Double-digit tackles for loss, like 7 sacks, 8 sacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I think that would be a really big needle mover, perception wise for Notre Dame, because like I feel like cornerback, you're already seeing the perception is good. They top 10 cornerback room.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if a safety stepping up and being great necessarily changes any perception on the field. Maybe it does in the draft, like if Xavier Watts breaks out. Sure. So it really comes down to me. It's really one of 4 guys. It's either Sam Hartman, Tobias Merriweather, or a Jaden Tom. I mean, pick a receiver. Sam Hartman, a receiver. I would say Tobias simply because he's younger and you know that you're definitely going to get more years from him. Yeah. So he can maybe string some together.
I think he'd be a little flashier too, which some people would. Like the perception would be like, "Wow, man, look at that guy! He looks like Marvin Harrison Jr." Like,
because like if Jaden Thomas breaks out, it's just going to be kind of like he's that guy that puts up the numbers, but you're like, "Oh wow, he had 8 catches for 115 yards." It's different. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
He's got like a monotonous feel. Not monotonous, but like just that really consistent, like
perception wise. But you know, for a football team, you're like, dude, I love this guy. He's money. Yes. But perception wise, yes, you're correct. Then like you said, the last two are an edge player and an interior player, whether it's Batelho, whether it's John Baptiste. I'll tell you what, though. You know what? I'm actually going to, on the edge, I'm going to zero in on a name. The guy's performance that could have the biggest impact on recruiting is not Jordan Batelho or Josh Burnham. It's Javonte Jean Baptiste, and here's why. We talked about it earlier. If you can take a guy from Ohio State who never produced anything more than rotation minutes and turn him into a dude, Ohio State can no longer say we can develop you better than they can at Notre Dame. That's gone. That's absolutely gone. Yeah. So perception-wise, Ryan, I think that's the one that would matter most for me on the edge. And then, of course, Mills is a little different in there. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan? I mean, because obviously if you produce Batelho, that's big. I mean, that's going to be impactful. But that unique Ohio State angle to that, what are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, I think it's because I think that some people would try to push back on it, and not even saying in the chat. I'm just saying, like, from a perception perspective, is they'd be like, well, Javonte Jean Baptiste learned that all at Ohio State. He just finally got opportunity at Notre Dame. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that it would be more impactful for me if it was a homegrown Notre Dame guy. So a Batelho, a Burnham, a guy that is literally the roots began here and it developed here, if that makes sense.
That's fair. So that's kind of like the Sam Hartman argument I had, right? I mean, that's like, okay, you just took advantage. You could get him more snaps. He was competing against Jack Sawyer and JT. Yeah, that's fair.
It's like Gino Guidugli is not going to be judged based upon what Sam Hartman is in 2023. He's going to be judged based upon what Kenny Minchie could do in 2024.
It doesn't hurt. It's not going to hurt him. It's not like it's irrelevant. But it's it's producing that homegrown guy more so than anything else. Yeah. I get that. Unless you're going to string them together like Lincoln Riley did. Because, I mean, every guy that Lincoln Riley developed at Oklahoma was a transfer.
That's true. It's very true.
The first one he had was Spencer Rattler, and he didn't pan out. Now, Caleb Williams will count as a homegrown guy, even though he played for him because he got him as a freshman. He followed him.
Yep.
But Baker Mayfield started games at Texas Tech.
Yep.
Kyler Murray started games at Texas A&M,
Yep.
and Jalen Hurts was at Alabama. So
Yep.
he literally got transfers. So you could have, but the difference there is he got those guys for multiple years.
Yes.
And so you could somewhat eliminate that by saying, yeah, but Kyler didn't do very well at Texas Tech or Texas A&M. And, Baylor didn't do great at Texas Tech. They came here and became stars. Sam Hartman's 19th and 18th all time in touchdown passes and touchdown. And 18th in touchdown, 19th in touchdown passes, 18th in passing yards in NCAA history. So it's not like, he underachieved at Wake Forest and they turned him into a star at Notre Dame. I don't know if I like this question or if I just think the name is hilarious, but either way, we're going to go with this one.
From Sexy Man, do you think NIL has made rivalries less relevant due to the fact no one stays at the same school and no one truly develops the desire and passion it takes to appreciate a rivalry? I do think there's something to that. Yeah. I do actually, yeah.
I think for the on-field product, it does. For fans, it doesn't matter. But I think the passion in the game, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Now, does it change certain rivalries? No, because Ohio State and Michigan, it doesn't change because I don't know because you're talking about two different things. You're talking about NIL and then the transfer portal. Like you said NIL, but really what you're referring to more so is the transfer portal, guys leaving.
Right. Yep.
And I say, because I don't think NIL is the issue. I think it's more the transfer portal. Because I think just because I'm getting paid doesn't. Yeah, just because I'm getting paid. Like Michael Mayer made a lot of money at Notre Dame last year. Did anyone ever question his passion or desire or love for Notre Dame last year?
He just didn't want it, man. Just didn't want it.
Right. Like no one ever said that, right? Like Ryan, if anything, it was quite the opposite. You'd see them lose a game. You look at Michael Mayer after the Stanford game, that guy was like crushed.
Defeated, yeah.
Absolutely crushed. He wasn't like, screw it, I got mine. All good. No. He was crushed.
Yep.
I think the transfer portal is more of that has hurt rivalries because you're literally seeing guys go from Bama to Georgia to Bama. It's just like, but I think at schools like Michigan and Ohio State, it's not having as big of an impact because they're just not dipping into the portal with the volume. Like USC, Notre Dame, that's why it's like kind of lost some of its luster. Like, Caleb Williams putting the FND on his finger. Like, why? What do you know about the Notre Dame rivalry? Like, seriously, you know what I mean? Like, most of those kids aren't there for that. For the Notre Dame kids, it's a little different. But, look, some of them will be impacted. Some of them won't. Like North Carolina has had so much turnover this offseason. Like, if I have a football rivalry with them, do those kids really get that? Like the kids that have been there for 4 years? I don't know.
There was a defensive end that went from Oklahoma State to Oklahoma this offseason, and the fans were like in an uproar, like, but then everybody else was just like, oh, who cares type of thing from the player perspective to your point. It's like the players just don't care as much about it anymore.
Man, you go ask like Marcus Freeman and guys older than him, how would you have felt if a dude from Michigan transferred to Ohio State or vice versa?
Right.
Go ask Charles Woodson how he would have felt if David Boston would have transferred to Michigan.
Seriously.
I don't play with that dude. I hate that guy. Now, you may not in real life, but it was just different back then.
Notre Dame guys would have been the same way. Like, Michigan, get out of here, man. You're not
exactly
here.
We didn't want Desmond here. We're trying to beat him, not play. It's interesting. That's an interesting. This is also an interesting one, Ryan, because it actually has happened before. So I wanted to bring it up.
And Antoine says, Brian, in recruiting, is it possible for you to go after a recruit without announcing it to the world, bringing attention, making your own recruiting harder? Can you give them a silent offer?
We have seen them do this before.
Yes, we have.
Where they say, hey, look, we're going to offer you, but we don't want it really getting out there just yet. And so, yeah, we've seen them do that. We've seen them kind of not talk to people and not let people know, or they've asked us, hey, we're going to offer this kid, but don't say anything about it until we do it because we want to do this. And then there's other kids, Ryan. What was interesting is with Brandon Hillman, they started leaking to like other staffs and coaches that, hey man, you might want to check this guy out. This guy's really good, because they wanted a bunch of people to offer him before they publicly offered him. But they had kind of told him beforehand, like, hey man, we want you. You're our guy, but here's what so that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what Antoine's talking about.
Yeah.
It as far as the silent offer, but he knew it was coming. But then they also kind of played the game to try to get him more publicity and attention and that stuff, and it worked.
Yes, it did.
It certainly worked.
We had a super chat from Gregory Perez. Thank you so much, Gregory. I'm a fan who has never made it to Notre Dame. To Notre Dame, I'm currently stationed in
San Diego. I think, yeah,
San Diego.
I think so.
At the moment,
That or
I
South
am.
Dakota.
Yeah, probably San Diego. At the moment, I am curious which game would be best to attend as a first game.
I mean, Gregory, listen. Here's this. I mean this. The honest to gosh truth. There is no bad game to come to Notre Dame and
There
watch
really
your team
isn't.
play if
There
you've
really
never
isn't.
been.
Except last year against Marshall, but otherwise, yes.
But like even then,
Yeah.
like was that your first game you ever been? No, you were
No,
Cincinnati
I've been to
before,
several
right?
at that point. Yeah, yeah.
Like to me, the outcome would like, for example, my first game was 2007, Ryan, against USC. That was not a good day. They wore those ugly freaking throwback 77 uniforms. And they got I had to watch Evan Sharpley playing quarterback for Notre Dame. And they got annihilated like 38-0. But you know what? Every memory I have from that day was still just in awe. Because
I heard Evan Sharpley should have been a starting quarterback at Notre Dame. So
over Jimmy Clausen. Exactly.
Yeah.
No. But just it's still like I have so many great memories from that day because it was like me and my dad. It was both of our first games at Notre Dame, and it's just an amazing experience. I mean, even Central Michigan, Pitt, Wake, they're all good experiences. If you're really looking to maximize sort of the experience plus the game, if you have a chance to attend, and we're talking this year,
yeah,
obviously the USC Ohio State games are huge if you can get tickets. The other one is Tennessee State because it's the home opener, and I have a feeling the halftime is going to be epic. So but the home opener's always got a buzz, you know. There's that, and you know, look, Pitt's a bit of a rival. If you're someone who likes the cold weather aspect of it, then come for the Pitt or the Wake Forest game. But those are the big ones for me. Is if you really want the environment, it's Ohio State, USC, and then Tennessee State because it is the opener. So those are the ones I look at, Ryan. But honestly, if you're looking at it just from an experience standpoint, there's really not a bad game to come to Notre Dame.
There's not.
There isn't, unless the weather sucks. You're like, man, this really blows.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I was joking about the Marshall game, but I had a great time at Marshall
right.
the actual game. So
right, that's what's cool about Notre Dame too, Ryan, because there's so much to experience and the memories that are beyond just the game.
Great, I would get there early, man. Get there like 9 a.m. Just walk
get
around.
There Friday.
Yes.
Get there Friday and experience all of it. See the trumpets. Make sure you see the player walk. Just see all of it, man. It is such a great experience. It really is.
Check out the grotto. Do everything. Yes.
Yep. It is. It is really a blast. It really is. Walk around the lake. All of it's really, really cool.
Yep.
Nathan Milton says, Ryan, Brian is the bridge down for Keon. No, I don't think so. And here's why. Keon, like the decision or not, handled it like a man.
Yeah.
He was honest with the staff. He told them what was going on. He did it with respect. He didn't sneak anything. He didn't say anything negative about Notre Dame. Ryan, you were at the All-Star game. He was hanging out with the Notre Dame commits more than he was hanging out with the Alabama
commits. Yeah, man. Him and Brandon Vernon were chummy, brother. And I mean, Keon came up to me and was like talking to me for a long time. Yeah. Man, I like Keon.
So I don't agree with Keon's decision. I've said this before. I think he made the wrong decision in my opinion, but he made it like a grown-up. He handled it with class. He was honest. He was respectful. He just felt somewhere else was better for his future. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. If Keon Keeley called up Notre Dame or jumped in the portal and said, "Hey, I made a mistake. I want to go to Notre Dame," I think they would embrace him with open arms. The players would and the coaches would, in my opinion. That's not the case with some other guys. I don't think if let's just say a safety from Texas that's now playing in the Big 12 wanted to do that, I don't think that they would receive that call well.
I wouldn't do it either.
Neither would I.
Yeah.
But, Dante, I don't think that – and not that they dislike Dante. It's just kind of like – it's more about just blocking CJ and then dealing with the other people around him. I don't think anyone at Notre Dame has any negative feelings about Dante himself at all. It's just the sideshow that comes with Dante. And then I just think they felt CJ was the better prospect, and they don't want to block CJ. So But yeah, there's a couple guys that bridge has been burned. If Harry Hiestand was still at Notre Dame, I don't think that Monroe Freeling would be coming to Notre Dame.
Yes, probably not.
Maybe now it might be, but then it wouldn't be. I want to answer two more, Ryan, and then we'll get out of here. Here's one from Byron Davis.
Byron says, if the majority of ACC schools want out and ESPN wants to shed the remaining 13 years of contract payments, is it the remaining ACC schools with no clear next option holding up change?
No, what's holding up the change is a very ironclad agreement. So this is my understanding of how it works. They can get out of their contract now. Florida State could leave for the SEC right now. The problem is they got to pay a 9-figure buyout fee, and they can't make TV revenue from their new conference for like the next 10 years. They could go to the SEC tomorrow, which again tells you this isn't about football. This is about money. Because if you really wanted to be in the SEC, if you thought that helped you football-wise, you could go.
Exactly.
You know, but it's not about that. The holdup is the contract. That's the holdup. And the holdup also is I mean, from the contract too, is there are a lot of schools that are like, hey, we're not being pursued by those conferences. Yep. So this isn't good for us. And some of those schools are they're sort of in the same school system. And so it's like some of those schools just can't go make decisions all on their own. You know what I mean? They have to, they're part of the same school system, and the decision has to be made within the school system. Like USC and UCLA had to pass through. They had to there was some sort of board that had to vote on it. USC didn't have to do all that because USC is a private school. They're their own institution. Now UCLA is part of the California school system. They had to go a different path. So I think that would factor into it as well. But the holdup is the contract and the money. That's the holdup. If they can't get out of the terms of the contract, then they're screwed. The only other thing that could happen, isn't it? It's crazy, right? The only thing is ESPN could somehow balk on the contract, and then ESPN would just have to pay those schools. They'd have to then pay a ton of money, and they don't have it. They don't have that kind of money.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, if both sides, because the thing is, you could say, well, both sides want out of it. No, they don't. Some schools on one side want out of it, but the ACC doesn't want out of it. They definitely don't want out of it, and they're holding all the cards right now. So, hey, ESPN, you want to get out of this deal? Fine, pay us $1 billion. You know what I mean? And then sure, we'll let you get out of it. And then that's kind of what would happen. But that's not going to happen. They don't have that kind of money, in my opinion. And then here's the last one, right? I thought this would be a cool one to get into. So because we both have very different perspectives or say paths to where we are now.
Jake says, both of you guys have football experience, both in playing, coaching, and analyzing. What advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue the same career?
My first bit of advice is to just be involved in it as much as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's a job or not, like when Ryan and I have both done this, where we've produced content that we love to do and we weren't getting paid for it. We just love to do it and we wanted to do it. And I never really thought that it would eventually become a profession. When I first started doing evaluations, it was about, I was planning on also getting back into coaching. It's just something I did for fun. But I just love to do it. And eventually it opened up doors for me to become my career. And now I'm running my own business. So it's just be in the game, be around it, be a part of communities. Like how it started for me was I was on a message board and giving my opinion. And the guy that ran it liked my opinions, eventually started paying me to provide him articles and content. And eventually I built up a following and built up a reputation, allowed me to continue to grow and grow and grow. And now I'm where I am. But I was around the game my whole life. I mean, I studied it. That's the thing is be a sponge, man. Learn the game. Go to coaching clinics if you can. Study teams that have success. Listen to people whose evaluations that you listen to and trust, and say, "Oh, that guy always talks about this with offensive linemen. I've never thought about that. I need to add that into my evaluations of offensive linemen." I think anytime you say, if you're ever at a point where you feel like you've stopped learning and no one can teach you anything and you've got it all figured out, it's probably because you're bored in that profession and you needed to find something else to do.
Yes.
And if you think you're the smartest guy in the room, look, there's not a lot of people that could come to me and give me an opinion about football that I'm going to be like, oh, wow, I'm immediately going to think about it. But trust me, There are definitely some. And I mean, Ryan, you know one. I got a text message recently from someone who I think is one of the best to ever do it. And when he says, I'm like, okay, I'm listening to that. I'm going to take that to heart and to evaluate it. And you know, that's kind of the thing that you know, there's been players that part of the reason I hired you was there's players say, hey, Brian, I think you need to give this guy another look and think about this. And I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna go watch it with a fresh set of eyes. And then, okay, cool. I don't know if you've ever had that with me, but I know I've had that impact with you. And so just all of that, find people that you respect, study what they do. And here's the thing, we live in this era where young people have this really stupid idea that you should never do anything for free. That's stupid. Because sometimes there aren't those opportunities, and I'm not going to pay you 50 grand to come work for me when I don't know what you can do. Do you know why I was willing to give Ryan an offer that for me and my business was pretty big? I don't know how big it was for him or from other people, but for me it was pretty big because I knew what he was bringing to the table because he'd established it. Even though it wasn't his profession, he was doing it on the side. Sometimes he's getting paid for things. I didn't pay Ryan much for the work he was doing for me. Ryan, you got like pennies basically doing stuff for me. It wasn't about the money. It was about, I want to write. I want to put this content out there. And if he wasn't willing to do that, then I wouldn't have known that Ryan's capable of doing this great work and wouldn't have hired him. Anyone that tells you don't do anything for free is giving you bad advice. If it's something you're passionate about, and you're able to do something and you're able to do it where you're getting your name and your ability out there, be willing to do it. Now, don't let someone screw you over and you're putting out 8, 10, 12 content pieces a week and they're giving you nothing.
Sure.
They're screwing you over. And what I mean for free, like put it on a message board. Hey, Brian, I want to write a weekly article for you and I'm willing to do it for free. I'll let you do that. Odds are I'm probably not going to have you do it for free. I'll end up giving you something.
Right.
But that's the thing. And so if you love it and you think you're good at it, be willing to do it without really factoring in the payment aspect of it. Just be willing to do it. And someone will find you and be willing to pay you enough to make it a career. But study the game. Don't ever stop studying the game. Be around the game. Have people that you talk ball with that are willing to challenge you. And just always, and study things you don't necessarily like. Too, if I like this offense, that's cool. Go study the air raid. Hey, I'm a 4-2-5 guy. Cool, great, love it. Go study the 3-4. Just because you're always learning more about the game. And so those are the things that I would encourage you to do, Jake. Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say just always be aware of your brand, right? Because everything that you do is growing your own personal brand on top of what other brand that you are a part of. And I think that the biggest thing that I at least think that has been somewhat successful for me is that I am authentic. Like I never shy away from being like, if I'm controversial, I'm controversial at times, right? Like I believe what I believe and I'm always going to put my name on top of that opinion. Right. So I think being opinionated and just being authentic is not a bad thing. I really think so. Just growing a personal brand is just always the best. And then the other thing I would say, Jake, is that it's okay to be in people's DMs and ask if they have stuff that you could do for them and to be persistent with it. Like, it's okay, man. It's okay. I used to feel bad about like, hey man, like love your site. You have an opening, like all that type of stuff. But like you get over that as you're trying to grow in the business, right? Like you miss 100 shots that you don't take, right? Like always shoot your shots.
What's the worst thing they can do, Ryan? What's the worst thing that can happen? Say no.
And you're exactly where you are. So yeah.
But it only takes one person to say yes. That's it.
100%. Yes. Yep.
You get 999 no's. You got an opportunity if you find that one person say yes.
And when you finally get to that level, you're not going to remember the 100 people that said no. You're just going to remember the position you're in now. And
if you do remember it, it's fuel.
Yes.
That's what it's fuel. And I would encourage you not to do that. But some people use it as fuel. I don't care about the people that said no. It doesn't bother me. They had to do what they had to do, and I'm going to do what I had to do. But you just need that one person to say, hey, I'll give you a shot, and then let your talent and your work ethic take over. And that's the thing is, if you're going to do this, you better be willing to work. If you think this job is a 9-to-5, find something else to do. Because it is not.
It is not.
It is not a 9-to-5. It is a 7 days a week, always on call, type of thing. But it's okay because you love what you do. That's going to do it for today. There was a great question from Irish Chi-Town that I was going to ask. I'm not sure if you're on the message boards, but you need to be, because you should answer that one on the message board. You should ask that question on the message board about the 3 players in college football. That's we just don't have time for that right now. But man, that's a fun question. Either bring that back tomorrow or let's talk about it on the message board. But we've got to run now, so we can't. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yeah, this was a great show. Thank you all again so much for a lot of great questions, a lot of great content today. We'll be back again tomorrow, of course, at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Make sure you hit that notification bell, though, on YouTube so you know that we have a show tonight, 6 o'clock Eastern time, and IB Nation Sports Talk. We'll be back, though, and we'll be pumping out great content. So make sure to go to Boris at irishbreakdown.com, irishbreakdown.com for some of the free content. We appreciate you all for being with us today. From Brian, I am Ryan. As always, we thank you so much for being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.